In the beginning of Exodus, the story continues directly from where Genesis concluded. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had entered the land of Egypt through the providence of God, led by the remarkable life of Joseph. Joseph, once sold into slavery by his brothers, was raised by God to become second only to Pharaoh, ruling over the land of Egypt and administering its resources during a severe famine. By his hand, Egypt was spared, and through him, Jacob and his entire household came to dwell in Egypt. The children of Israel settled in the land of Goshen, a fertile place provided by Pharaoh himself. But as time passed, so did the generations. Joseph died, along with his brothers and all that generation. Their bones were laid to rest, but their descendants remained, and the covenant of God remained upon them. As it is written in Exodus 1 verses 6 to 7. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. The promise given to Abraham in Genesis 17 verses 4 to 5 was being fulfilled. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. The children of Israel multiplied greatly. Their families grew large, their livestock flourished, their communities expanded. What began as 70 souls, as recorded in Genesis 46 verse 27. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70, became a great multitude. The land of Goshen, once quiet, was now filled with the vibrant life of God's chosen people. But with the passing of time, a new ruler arose in Egypt, a king who knew not Joseph. He neither recognized the deeds of Joseph nor honored the God who had saved Egypt through him. This king saw only the growing numbers of foreigners within his borders, and his heart was filled with fear. Exodus 1 verses 8 to 9 records. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. What God had ordained as blessing, Pharaoh interpreted as threat. The fruitfulness of God's people was seen as danger by Egypt's ruler. The king feared that if war should come, the Israelites might join with Egypt's enemies and rise against him. Exodus 1 verse 10 continues his fearful counsel. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass, that, when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Thus Pharaoh devised a plan to suppress the people of God. His counsel was not wisdom, but dread clothed as strategy. In his mind, reducing their strength would protect his throne. The people of Israel, innocent of any rebellion, now found themselves the targets of political fear and ruthless oppression. Their multiplying families, once the evidence of God's covenant, became the reason for their suffering in the eyes of Pharaoh. Yet even as Pharaoh plotted, God watched. His covenant was unshaken. His promise to Abraham still stood, as declared in Genesis 15 verse 5. Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. The stage was being set for God to reveal his power, his faithfulness, and his glory, even in the face of oppression and fear. The people of Israel had entered Egypt as honored guests. Now they were becoming slaves. But the God who never sleeps nor slumbers had not forgotten his people. His covenant remained. His purpose would not fail. Pharaoh's fear was not satisfied. The growth of the children of Israel continued despite the heavy oppression placed upon them. Brick by brick, the Israelites labored under the harsh rule of Egypt. Yet as their backs bent lower, their numbers grew higher. The more they were afflicted, the more they multiplied. The hand of God remained firmly upon his covenant people. What began as political fear in Pharaoh's mind had now grown into a determination to destroy an entire generation. The schemes of man escalated into the slaughter of innocents. The king of Egypt, blinded by pride and dread, sought a final solution. Exodus 1 verses 15 to 16 records. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live. This was no longer an indirect oppression. This was calculated murder. The midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, stood before the throne of Egypt as Pharaoh's chilling decree was handed to them. They were to snuff out life as it entered the world, to extinguish the sons of Israel before their first cries could even fill the air. Every male child, the strength of the future generation, was to be silently put to death at birth. But Pharaoh underestimated the power of the fear of God. Shiphrah and Puah were women of reverence. Though they stood before the king of Egypt, they trembled before the king of all creation. The weight of Pharaoh's authority could not outweigh the voice of their conscience, shaped by their devotion to the God of Abraham. Exodus 1 verse 17 declares, But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Every birth was a moment of defiance. With each cry of a newborn boy, the midwives risked their lives. Their hands, called to deliver life, refused to become instruments of death. In the secrecy of the birthing chambers, behind drawn curtains and whispering women, sons were born and preserved. Soon word reached Pharaoh that his decree was not being carried out. Furious, he summoned the midwives. His voice, filled with anger, demanded answers. Exodus 1 verse 18. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, Why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? The midwives, with wisdom granted from above, spoke with careful truth. Exodus 1 verse 19 says, And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Their answer both concealed their resistance and revealed the strength of Hebrew mothers. Before the midwives could arrive, the children were already born. By this account, Pharaoh was left without proof to convict them, and God, seeing their reverence, blessed them for their courage. Exodus 1 verses 20 to 21 continues, Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied, and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. The very decree that was designed to crush the growth of Israel only led to further multiplication. The God who had promised Abraham in Genesis 22 verse 17, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, remained faithful. But Pharaoh's heart hardened further. If the secret killing failed, then he would make his decree public and brutal. This was no longer limited to midwives, but now involved all Egyptians. Exodus 1 verse 22 records, And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. The Nile River, which once brought life and nourishment to Egypt, was now commanded to become the grave of Hebrew infants. Soldiers and citizens alike were ordered to seize every newborn son of Israel and hurl him into the waters. The cries of Hebrew mothers filled the land. Night after night, the sounds of weeping echoed through the homes of Goshen. Mothers clutched their infants tightly, praying, hiding, trembling at every knock on the door. Fathers, powerless to protect their sons, wept in bitter agony. The wailing of Israel ascended into the heavens. Exodus 2 verse 23 later reflects this period of suffering. And it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. The silent cries were not unheard. Though God's voice had not yet thundered, though his hand had not yet moved, he listened. He watched as his people suffered, and the time of divine intervention drew near. While death swept through the land, while infants were ripped from their mother's arms and hurled into the river, one family stood in defiant faith. Exodus 2 verses 1 to 2 declares, And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son, And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. A Levite man, Amram, and his wife, Jochebed, conceived a child during these dreadful days. And when this mother looked upon her newborn son, she saw that he was a goodly child, a beautiful child, marked with divine favor. The book of Hebrews speaks of this moment in Hebrews 11 verse 23. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. For 3 long months they hid their child. Every breath the child took was a testimony of God's mercy. Every knock at the door brought terror. Every Egyptian patrol through the streets sent fear into their hearts. But their faith refused to surrender him to death. The days passed and the danger grew. The louder his infant cries became, the harder it was to conceal him. Eventually, they could no longer hide him. The command of Pharaoh remained unyielding, but this mother would not deliver her son to the hands of men. Instead, she would deliver him into the hands of God. The time had come. The cries of her child had grown louder. The risk of discovery was greater with each passing day. The Levite mother, Jochebed, faced an impossible decision. To keep the child hidden was to invite certain death for both him and the family. Yet to release him to Pharaoh's decree was unthinkable. She was a mother trapped between fear and faith. But within her heart, God stirred a plan. One that would require great courage and even greater trust. Exodus 2 verse 3 records, "And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. With trembling hands, Jochebed gathered the reeds of the Nile, bulrushes, and wove them into a basket. Every strand was wrapped not only in her labor, but in her prayers. The ark was made waterproof with pitch and slime, sealed carefully so that the water would not seep in. This ark, though small and fragile, resembled another ark from generations before, the Ark of Noah, built in faith to preserve life in the face of judgment. So too was this ark built, not for many, but for one child whose life held the promise of God's deliverance. She placed her son gently inside the basket, wrapping him securely, shielding him from the burning sun. Every detail was attended to with a mother's care. The weight of the moment was heavy. This small ark would now carry her child into the river that had become the grave for so many Hebrew sons. With tear-filled eyes and a heart breaking with both dread and hope, she carried the basket to the Nile and laid it among the reeds near the river's edge. There, concealed among the tall grasses, the basket floated small, vulnerable, and yet fully in the hands of the Almighty. Exodus 2 verse 4 says, "And his sister stood afar off, to wit what would be done to him. Miriam, the child's sister, hid nearby, her young eyes fixed on the basket, watching, waiting, praying. Every rustle of the reeds, every ripple of the water filled her with anxiety. Would someone find him? Would soldiers discover the child and carry him away? Or would God intervene?" Then, as if directed by unseen hands, Pharaoh's daughter came to the river to bathe. The timing was divine. The daughter of the very man who sought to destroy the sons of Israel would now become the instrument of deliverance. Exodus 2 verse 5 records, "And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. The basket was drawn from the reeds and brought before the princess. As the lid was opened, the child inside began to cry. His small voice pierced the air. The first sound Pharaoh's daughter heard from him was a cry of life, not death." Exodus 2 verse 6 says, "And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and, behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.' Her heart was immediately moved. The command of her father to kill every Hebrew son weighed against the sight of this helpless, crying infant. The law of the king stood before her, yet compassion overruled it. She recognized that the child was a Hebrew, marked perhaps by his swaddling cloth or his features, and yet she chose mercy. At that moment, Miriam, watching from the distance, approached boldly. Though just a child, her courage was mighty. Exodus 2 verse 7 records. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed to Miriam's proposal, and thus God's providence unfolded with stunning beauty. The very mother who had placed her son in the river was now summoned to care for him under royal protection. Exodus 2 verses 8 to 9 continues, "And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child, and nursed it. The mother who had surrendered her son to the waters now held him again in her arms. She nursed him openly, no longer hiding in fear but under the authority of the very house that sought his destruction. Moreover, she was paid wages to care for her own child, a payment that Pharaoh himself would unknowingly fund. This was not chance. This was not coincidence. This was the orchestration of God Almighty, who rules even over the plans of kings. The child grew under his mother's care, nurtured in the knowledge of his people, of his God, and of the covenant made with Abraham. In these formative years, seeds were planted deep within him, seeds that would one day bloom into his calling as deliverer. When the child was weaned, he was brought into Pharaoh's household to be raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Exodus 2 verse 10 says, "And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, Because I drew him out of the water." The name Moses, meaning drawn out, was a living testimony of God's hand over his life, drawn out from the Nile, drawn out from certain death, drawn out for a divine purpose yet to be revealed. Moses was now raised in the courts of Egypt. The palace of Pharaoh became his home, surrounded by wealth, luxury, and the finest education of the time. Moses was trained in all the wisdom of Egypt. Acts 7 verse 22 declares, "And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. He wore the garments of royalty. He walked the marble halls of the palace. He ate at the king's table. Scholars, tutors, and military leaders instructed him. The arts of leadership, war, and administration were engraved into his mind. Yet within him, a silent tension grew. Though outwardly an Egyptian prince, inwardly he was a Hebrew. The blood of Abraham ran through his veins. The covenant of God whispered to his soul. The God of his forefathers watched over him, even as he lived beneath Pharaoh's roof. Day after day he walked between two worlds, one of privilege and power, the other of slavery and suffering. He saw the burdens laid upon his people. He heard their cries in the fields. He witnessed their affliction under the taskmasters. Though he lived in comfort, the pain of his brethren stirred deeply within him. The dual identity weighed heavily upon Moses. He was a prince by adoption but a Hebrew by birth. Inwardly, his heart burned with conflict. The luxury of Egypt offered him ease, but the cries of his people demanded justice. The time was drawing near when these two worlds would collide, and the destiny for which he was born would begin to unfold. The years passed. Moses, now fully grown, continued to live within Pharaoh's palace. Outwardly, he was a prince of Egypt, but inwardly, his heart remained heavy. The division between who he was and where he lived could no longer be ignored. Though Moses enjoyed the privileges of royalty, he could not close his eyes to the suffering of his brethren, the children of Israel, his people, who groaned beneath the weight of slavery. He heard their cries as the taskmasters drove them mercilessly. He saw their backs scarred from the lashes of Egyptian whips. He watched their strength drained as they labored under crushing burdens. The knowledge of his heritage burned within him. He knew the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had made a covenant with his people, a covenant of promise and deliverance. Yet before him stood a reality of chains and tears. Exodus 2 verse 11 begins, "And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. On this particular day, Moses left the palace and walked among his people. The pain and suffering he saw stirred his soul deeply. But then, his eyes fell upon a scene that would ignite a fire within him. A taskmaster, an Egyptian overseer, violently beating a Hebrew slave. The taskmaster's whip cut into the flesh of the Hebrew man. Blow after blow rained down upon him. His cries of agony echoed in the air, but no one dared intervene. The man lay bleeding, gasping beneath the brutal force of the Egyptian's wrath. Moses stood and watched. Anger surged within him. The injustice, the cruelty, the unbearable oppression, everything boiled to the surface. His heart pounded. His breath quickened. His eyes scanned the area. Exodus 2 verse 12 says, "And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand." Seeing no one nearby, Moses acted. He struck the Egyptian. The life of the oppressor was swiftly ended. The body of the Egyptian taskmaster fell silent, lifeless in the sand. With haste and trembling hands, Moses dragged the corpse, covering it beneath the earth. The sand concealed the body, but it could not conceal the deed. Though no eyes appeared to witness his act, unseen eyes watched, both earthly and divine. Moses' action was not only a defense of his people but also a crossing of an invisible line. In that moment, Moses had chosen the side of his oppressed brethren, and his life as an Egyptian prince was now at risk. The next day, Moses returned to the fields where his people labored. His heart still weighed heavily from what had taken place. As he walked, he came upon two Hebrews engaged in a bitter dispute. Exodus 2 verse 13 recounts, "And when he went out the second day, behold, two men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow?" Moses intervened, seeking to restore peace among his brethren. He confronted the one who was in the wrong, asking why he would strike his own brother. But instead of gratitude or repentance, the man turned on Moses with a piercing accusation. Exodus 2 verse 14 declares, "And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me, as thou killedst the Egyptian?" The words pierced Moses like a sword. His secret was no longer hidden. The act he believed was done in secret had been exposed. Fear gripped his heart. If word had reached this man, surely it would reach others, and soon Pharaoh himself. The news spread rapidly. Soon, Pharaoh heard of the incident. The wrath of the king burned hot. Though Moses had been raised as a son within his palace, Pharaoh now sought his life. The law of Egypt would show him no mercy. Exodus 2 verse 15 records, "Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian." Moses fled swiftly. The luxurious halls of Pharaoh's palace were now closed to him. The wealth, the power, the comfort, all lost in a moment. He left behind the life he had known, running into the vast and barren wilderness. The land of Midian lay far from Egypt's reach, a desolate land of mountains, deserts, and distant shepherd tribes. Alone and stripped of everything, Moses became a fugitive, a wanderer with no home, no protection, and no plan. Every step into the wilderness was a step deeper into the unknown. The hot desert winds burned his face. The sands shifted beneath his feet. The silence of the wilderness pressed heavily upon him. His princely garments now offered no protection from the harsh sun. The man who had been trained in all the wisdom of Egypt now found himself lost in desolation. But even as he fled, God was watching. The covenant still stood. Though Moses had fallen from the heights of Pharaoh's house into the emptiness of Midian, the hand of God was leading him toward a destiny far greater than anything Egypt could offer. The desert would become his refining ground. The wilderness would become his classroom. The silence would become his preparation. Though rejected by man, he was not forgotten by God. The years turned into decades. The once mighty prince of Egypt, clothed in fine linens and trained in the wisdom of the greatest empire on earth, now walked the dry and barren lands of Midian. Gone were the marble pillars, the royal courts, the armies, and the grandeur of Pharaoh's palace. Moses, now a fugitive, lived far from Egypt's wealth, tending sheep in the solitude of the wilderness. Moses had exchanged the voice of Egyptian tutors for the sound of bleating sheep. He had traded royal banquets for the simplicity of shepherd's bread. Every day, under the blistering sun, he led his flocks across rocky hills, through narrow valleys, across dry riverbeds, and along rugged paths worn only by wandering beasts and men like himself. Men cast into exile by the weight of their past. Midian was not a land of kings. It was not a land of glory. It was a land of silence, a land of forgotten men. But here, in the obscurity of this desolate land, God was fashioning his servant for a task unlike any the world had ever known. Exodus 3 verse 1 records with quiet simplicity the moment that would forever change the world. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb, the backside of the desert, far beyond the populated places, where no crowds gathered, no cities stood, no sounds interrupted the stillness. This was the place God had chosen to reveal himself. Before Moses stood Mount Horeb, later to be known as Mount Sinai, a mountain that would echo with thunder, smoke with fire, and tremble beneath the feet of the Almighty. But on this day, it stood silent, waiting for its appointed hour. As Moses carefully guided the flock across the stony terrain, his eyes caught something unusual, something that did not belong in the familiar landscape of the wilderness. Exodus 3 verse 2 declares, "And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. The bush blazed. Flames rose, dancing upon its branches. Yet the branches remained whole. The leaves were not scorched. The flames devoured nothing. It was a fire unlike any fire Moses had ever known." In the heart of a lifeless wilderness stood a symbol of divine mystery, a living flame that consumed nothing, an earthly bush enveloped by a heavenly presence. Exodus 3 verse 3 continues, "And Moses said, I will now turn aside, and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." The curiosity that stirred in Moses was not merely human fascination. It was the first pull of God drawing him toward a destiny prepared before the foundation of the world. As Moses stepped closer, crossing from the ordinary into the extraordinary, the voice of eternity called his name. Exodus 3 verse 4 says, "And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I." The voice did not shout in thunder. It called him personally. Twice the voice spoke his name. Moses, Moses, the voice of the God of his fathers, summoning him into divine presence. In that sacred moment, Moses answered with trembling awe, "Here am I." But God immediately set the boundaries of holiness. This was no place for casual approach. This was no ordinary encounter. Exodus 3 verse 5 commands, "And he said, Draw not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground." The ground beneath Moses' feet had not changed its composition of rock and sand. Yet, in the presence of the Almighty, even the dust of the earth was consecrated. Shoes, stained with the dirt of daily life, had no place where the Eternal One stood. Moses, trembling, removed his sandals. He stood barefoot before the holy fire, feeling the cold ground beneath his feet, overwhelmed by reverence. Then God revealed himself fully. Exodus 3 verse 6 declares, "Moreover he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. The God who made covenant with Abraham beneath the starry skies. The God who spoke to Isaac in times of famine. The God who wrestled with Jacob by the river Jabbok. The same God now stood before Moses, speaking from the flames. Moses covered his face. His knees weakened beneath him. To behold the face of God was too great for mortal eyes. And then, for the first time, God revealed his divine purpose. Not only for Moses but for an entire nation enslaved in Egypt. Exodus 3 verse 7 speaks the heart of God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows. The eyes of God had never turned away. Every lash that tore into Israelite flesh, every brick laid under cruel commands, every stolen infant thrown into the Nile, all had been seen. Every groan, every whispered prayer, every tear that fell in the night, all had been heard. The sorrows of Israel were not forgotten. They were written before the throne of heaven. And now God had come down to act. Exodus 3 verse 8 continues, And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. The promise sworn to Abraham of a land prepared, a place of inheritance, a land of fruitfulness, was now ready to be fulfilled. But God's plan required a vessel, and that vessel stood barefoot before the burning bush. Exodus 3 verse 10 delivers the command, Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people the children of Israel out of Egypt. The man who fled Egypt in fear was now called to return in power. The fugitive was summoned to stand before the very throne from which he had fled. But Moses, overwhelmed by the task, doubted his own worthiness. Exodus 3 verse 11 says, And Moses said unto God, Who am I, that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? Moses looked at his weaknesses, his failures, his insignificance. But God's answer did not speak of Moses' strength. It spoke of God's presence. Exodus 3 verse 12. And he said, Certainly I will be with thee. And this shall be a token unto thee, that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. The assurance was simple and eternal. I will be with thee. This mountain, Horeb, where Moses now stood trembling, would become the very place where an entire nation would one day gather to meet their God. Yet Moses still questioned. Exodus 3 verse 13. And Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers hath sent me unto you. And they shall say to me, What is his name? What shall I say unto them? The children of Israel, crushed by years of slavery, would surely ask by whose authority Moses came. What name would he declare? Then came one of the most sacred revelations in all of Scripture. Exodus 3 verse 14 says, And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. The God who simply is self-existent, eternal, dependent upon none, unchanging, beyond time, beyond space, beyond comprehension, the one who was and is and ever shall be. Exodus 3 verse 15 continues, And God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. The name that would echo through generations. The name that would be whispered in worship, cried out in desperation, exalted in praise. This was the God of covenant, who remembered his people, who heard their groaning, and who now called a shepherd from exile to become his instrument of deliverance. But before this divine encounter, Moses had been a man alone in a strange land, surviving in the wilderness and seeking refuge among the people of Midian. His story there was not one of mere exile, but of providence and grace. Moses' survival depended on more than his own strength. It was sustained by God's invisible hand and the kindness of strangers. One day, near a well in the wilderness, Moses came upon 7 shepherdess daughters of Jethro, the priest of Midian. These women had come to draw water for their father's flock. But as they filled their pitchers, other shepherds arrived and drove them away, leaving them unable to water their sheep. Moses, seeing their distress, rose and intervened. He defended the women and helped water their flocks. Exodus 2 verses 16 to 17. And the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. This act of kindness did not go unnoticed. Jethro, their father, welcomed Moses into his home. Recognizing his character and strength, Jethro gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses as a wife. Their marriage was a union of trust, respect, and blessing. Zipporah, a Midianite woman, became Moses' companion, the mother of his children, and his support in the wilderness. Exodus 2 verses 21 to 22. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter unto Moses. And she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. The name Gershom means a stranger there, a poignant reminder of Moses' own alienation, a man caught between worlds, a fugitive far from home, yet under the providential care of God. Through this marriage, Moses found shelter, family, and a new beginning. The wilderness, though harsh and unforgiving, was also a place of preparation, of reflection, and of communion with God. For years, Moses tended flocks in the quiet of Midian, learning patience and humility. The solitude molded his spirit, preparing him for the great task that lay ahead. The promise of deliverance was at the heart of God's revelation to Moses. It was a divine plan that had been set in motion from the earliest days of the covenant with Abraham, a plan that now reached its appointed time. The God who saw the affliction of his people, who heard their cries beneath the harsh hand of Egyptian bondage, was ready to act decisively and powerfully. Exodus 3 verses 7 to 8 reveals this sacred purpose. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. This was not merely a rescue mission but the fulfillment of a sacred promise. God intended to bring Israel out of physical slavery, but more importantly, to lead them into a new spiritual identity. A people dedicated to Him, serving Him in freedom and blessing. The land flowing with milk and honey was a symbol of abundance, provision, and God's favor. It was a place where His people would no longer suffer scarcity or oppression but would live in the fullness of His blessing. Yet, the path to that promised land would not be easy. It would require confrontation, persistence, miracles, and the unwavering presence of God with His people. God's plan was grand in scope and intimate in detail. It required a deliverer, a prophet, a leader who would stand before Pharaoh and command the release of Israel. That deliverer was Moses. But Moses was overwhelmed by the enormity of this calling. His heart was heavy with doubts, fears, and a deep sense of inadequacy. His first objection echoed his own self-perception. Who am I, that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? Exodus 3 verse 11. Moses felt unworthy and insufficient. He was a man marked by failure and fear, a fugitive from Egypt's justice. How could such a man confront the most powerful ruler of his day and demand the freedom of an entire nation? God's answer was simple but profound. Certainly I will be with thee. Exodus 3 verse 12. This assurance was not a promise of Moses' own strength but of divine presence. God would go with him. His power would be revealed through Moses. The success of the mission depended not on human ability but on God's faithfulness. Still, Moses worried about credibility. How would the children of Israel believe that God had truly appeared to him? How would they accept him as their deliverer? Exodus 4 verse 1 recounts Moses' concern. But Moses said, They will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice. For they will say, The Lord hath not appeared unto thee. In response, God gave Moses miraculous signs to perform before the people, signs that would authenticate his mission. Exodus 4 verses 2 to 5 describes one such sign. And the Lord said unto him, What is that in thine hand? And he said, A rod. And he said, Cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, Put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand, and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. This transformation of a simple shepherd's rod into a living serpent and back again demonstrated God's power over nature and the impossible. These signs were intended to convince both Moses and Israel of God's active presence. Moses' fears deepened when he considered his own abilities. Exodus 4 verse 10. O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant. But I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. He feared his lack of eloquence and skill in speaking would hinder the mission. How could he confront Pharaoh or inspire a nation with such limitations? God's reply was compassionate yet authoritative. Exodus 4 verses 11 to 12. Who hath made man's mouth, or who mocketh the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. God reminded Moses that he was the author of all abilities and disabilities. Where Moses was weak, God would be strong. The divine presence would equip him with the words and wisdom needed to fulfill his calling. Even then, Moses hesitated. Exodus 4 verse 13. O my Lord, send, I pray thee, by the hand of him whom thou wilt send. He asked God to send someone else, to relieve him of this daunting task. God's response was firm. He appointed Aaron, Moses' brother, to be his spokesman. Together, they would face Pharaoh and lead Israel to freedom. Exodus 4 verses 14 to 16. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee. And when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart. Thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth. And I will be with thy mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what ye shall do. And he shall be thy spokesman unto the people. And he shall be, even he shall be to thee instead of a mouth, and thou shalt be to him instead of God. God's plan was comprehensive. Moses was not alone. He was given a partner, a voice, and the divine presence to empower their mission. Thus, with his fears confronted and his doubts met with divine assurance, Moses prepared to obey the call that would change the course of history and deliver a nation. The mission God entrusted to Moses was overwhelming, not only because of the vastness of the task, but also because of Moses' own fears and insecurities. Understanding this, God did not leave Moses to face these challenges alone. Instead, he provided tangible, miraculous signs, symbols of his power and presence, that would serve as evidence both to Moses himself and to the Israelites. The first of these signs centered upon what Moses held in his hand, a simple shepherd's staff. Though ordinary in appearance, this staff would become a powerful instrument in God's hand. Exodus 4 verses 2 to 4 says, And the Lord said unto him, What is that in thine hand? And he said, A rod. And he said, Cast it on the ground. And he cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, Put forth thine hand, and take it by the tail. And he put forth his hand, and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. Moses witnessed firsthand the miraculous transformation. His staff turned into a living serpent, writhing and hissing before him. Fear seized him, and he recoiled, but God instructed him to grasp the serpent by its tail. Upon doing so, the serpent became once again a lifeless rod. This sign was a profound lesson in God's authority over nature and the impossible. What seemed powerless in human hands could become mighty through divine power. This rod, once a simple tool for tending sheep, was now a symbol of God's presence and power to confront Pharaoh and deliver Israel. God did not stop with one sign. Understanding Moses' doubts and his concern about credibility, he provided another sign, this time more personal and intimate. Exodus 4 verses 6 to 7 says, And the Lord said furthermore unto him, Put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, Put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom. And, behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. The transformation of Moses' hand into leprous white and back to normal flesh was a vivid and undeniable miracle. It symbolized God's power to both afflict and heal, to bring judgment and mercy. This sign was to reassure Moses that no matter the opposition, the God who called him was the God who healed and restored. With these signs, Moses was to demonstrate to the Israelites that his commission was from the Lord. They were visible proof that God was acting through him, empowering him and guiding him. Despite these assurances, Moses continued to wrestle with the enormity of the mission and his own sense of inadequacy. His next objections were not simply personal but practical. Moses feared he was not the man to speak effectively to the people or to Pharaoh. He felt unable to convince either group that God had sent him. It was in this context that God appointed a spokesman to assist Moses, his brother Aaron. Exodus 4 verses 14 to 16 recounts this divine provision. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. And also, behold, he cometh forth to meet thee, and when he seeth thee, he will be glad in his heart. Thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth. And I will be with thy mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what ye shall do. And he shall be thy spokesman unto the people. And he shall be, even he shall be to thee instead of a mouth, and thou shalt be to him instead of God." God's choice of Aaron as Moses' spokesman was not random but purposeful. Aaron, a Levite like Moses, was skilled in speech and persuasion, able to communicate effectively with both the Israelites and the Egyptian authorities. In appointing Aaron, God acknowledged Moses' limitations and met him where he was. Together, the brothers would form a divine team, Moses as the leader and Aaron as the voice. This partnership would be essential in confronting Pharaoh and leading Israel to freedom. The promise that God would be with both Moses and Aaron was a profound assurance. God did not leave Moses to face his fears alone but enveloped him in his sustaining presence, guiding both their words and actions. With the rod that became a serpent, the leprous hand healed, and Aaron at his side, Moses was equipped with the signs and support needed to fulfill the monumental task before him. The preparation was complete, the calling clear, the power assured. Yet the journey ahead would require unwavering faith, courage, and reliance upon the living God, the great I Am who had promised to be with them every step of the way. After the profound encounter at Mount Horeb and the commissioning by the Almighty, Moses prepared himself to leave the wilderness of Midian. The solitary shepherd was called once more to a path fraught with danger, to return to the very land he had fled, Egypt. Yet this time he would not go alone. Moses took with him his wife, Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, priest of Midian, whose presence had been a source of comfort and strength in the years of exile. He also brought his 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar, symbols of the family he had built in the desert, now traveling with him toward a destiny that would forever alter history. The journey back to Egypt was not simply a physical return. It was a spiritual passage from obscurity toward confrontation, from exile toward deliverance. The weight of the divine mission pressed upon Moses, yet alongside him walked those he loved, tethered by blood and faith. However, on this journey, a mysterious and terrifying event unfolded, one that has puzzled readers for millennia, steeped in symbolism and divine urgency. Exodus 4 verses 24 to 26 recounts this cryptic episode. "And it came to pass by the way in the inn, that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone, and cut off the foreskin of her son, and cast it at his feet, and said, Surely a bloody husband art thou to me." This passage is stark and unsettling. God, who had called Moses to be the deliverer of Israel, now appeared to seek his life. The reasons for this divine action are veiled in mystery, but ancient tradition and scriptural interpretation provide illuminating insight. At the heart of this encounter lies the covenant of circumcision, a sacred sign established with Abraham, a physical mark of God's everlasting covenant with his people. Genesis 17 verses 10 to 14. Circumcision was not merely ritual but a profound declaration of belonging to God's chosen covenant family. Moses, as a son of Levi and leader-to-be, was required to uphold this covenant personally and within his household. Yet it appears that the son he bore in Midian had not been circumcised, perhaps due to the distance from Israelite traditions or the trials of exile. God's seeking of Moses' life was a divine admonition, a warning that the covenantal sign had been neglected, and that Moses must submit fully to God's law and purpose, beginning with his own family. Zipporah's swift action, taking a sharp stone and circumcising her son, symbolized immediate obedience and the sealing of the covenant. Her declaration, "Surely a bloody husband art thou to me," may reflect the pain and urgency of this moment, as well as recognition that Moses' commitment to God required sacrifice and consecration. Only after this act did the threat pass, and Moses was allowed to continue safely toward Egypt, now fully aligned with the covenant and its demands. Turning back to the key verses from Moses' initial encounter with God, we find profound theological affirmations. Exodus 3 verses 5 to 6 encapsulates Moses' experience on the holy mountain. "Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Moreover he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God." This verse highlights the sacredness of divine encounter, the necessity of reverence and humility before the Almighty, who reveals himself as the covenant God of the patriarchs. Exodus 3:14, where God reveals his name, remains central. "I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you." This name signifies God's eternal presence, unchanging nature, and self-existence, assuring Moses and Israel that the God who sends is the God who is always present and faithful. Finally, Exodus 4 verses 10 to 12 reflects Moses' deep human vulnerability and God's sustaining grace. "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant. But I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who mocketh the dumb, or deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say." In these verses, Moses confesses his inadequacy, fearing that his lack of eloquence would hinder the mission. God responds by reminding Moses that he is the source of all ability and promises his personal presence and guidance in speech and deed. The combination of divine assurance and human frailty weaves through Moses' story, portraying a God who calls imperfect people to extraordinary purposes, empowering them to accomplish his will. As Moses prepared to face Pharaoh, with his family beside him and the covenant sealed, he carried not only his own fears but the weight of an entire nation's hope, all resting upon the promise of the great I Am, who had revealed himself in the burning bush and promised to be with Moses in every step ahead. Moses, now fully commissioned and equipped with God's assurance, set out on the monumental task before him. His journey took him from the wilderness of Midian back to the very seat of power he had once fled, the palace of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He was not alone. His brother Aaron stood beside him, ready to be his voice, his spokesman. Together, they carried the weight of a divine mandate, to demand freedom for the enslaved children of Israel. Exodus 5 verse 1 records the pivotal moment of confrontation. "And afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness." The demand was simple yet profound. God's voice, spoken through Moses and Aaron, called for liberation, a release from bondage, an end to slavery. The Israelites were to journey out of Egypt, not as slaves but as free people, to worship their God in the wilderness. Pharaoh's response was swift and harsh. He refused outright, dismissing the authority behind the demand. But more than refusal, Pharaoh sought to break the spirit of Israel by intensifying their burden. Exodus 5 verse 2 states, "And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." Pharaoh's words reveal the heart of the conflict, a defiant denial of the true God. Pharaoh was the ruler of Egypt, regarded as a god by his people, yet he arrogantly rejected the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. His pride blinded him to the coming judgment. Pharaoh's refusal did not merely maintain the status quo, it escalated the suffering of the Israelites. He commanded the taskmasters to stop providing straw for brickmaking but demanded the same quota of bricks from the slaves. Exodus 5 verses 6 to 9 describes this cruel edict. And the same day Pharaoh commanded the same day the taskmasters of the people, and their officers, saying, Ye shall no more give the people straw to make brick as heretofore. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And the tale of the bricks, which they did make heretofore, ye shall lay upon them. Ye shall not diminish aught thereof, for they be idle. Therefore they cry, saying, Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let their more work be laid upon the men, that they may labor therein, and let them not regard vain words. The burden grew heavier, the lashes fiercer, the cries louder. Yet, as Exodus 5 verse 21 records, the people turned their frustration toward Moses and Aaron. And the people did muse because of their burdens, and they cried, and their cry came up unto Pharaoh because of the burdens. Moses felt the weight of failure. The very people he was sent to deliver now accused him of worsening their plight. The flame of hope flickered amidst despair. But God's plan was unfolding in divine timing. The confrontation with Pharaoh was not to be an immediate victory, but a demonstration of God's power, patience, and sovereignty. Following this initial encounter, God revealed his purpose in prolonging Pharaoh's stubbornness. Exodus 9 verse 16 declares, And in very deed for this cause have I raised thee up, for to shew in thee my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Pharaoh's hardened heart would serve as the stage upon which God's mighty acts would be displayed, acts that would shake Egypt and echo through history. The ensuing chapters recount the 10 plagues, divine judgments sent to compel Pharaoh's release of Israel and to demonstrate the impotence of Egyptian gods and the supremacy of the Lord God. Each plague was a calculated strike against the land, the economy, and the false deities of Egypt. They ranged from the Nile turning to blood, to invasions of frogs, lice, flies, livestock disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally the death of the firstborn. Throughout these calamities, Pharaoh's heart alternated between resistance and temporary submission, only to harden again. The narrative reveals a cosmic battle between God and Pharaoh, between truth and pride, between freedom and bondage. Exodus 7 verse 5 affirms, And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt, and bring out the children of Israel from among them. The confrontation with Pharaoh was not merely a political struggle, but a profound spiritual conflict, showcasing God's power to redeem and the futility of opposing his will. Pharaoh's heart, once perhaps only cautious and wary, became like the hardest stone, impervious to the voice of God and the pleas of Moses and Aaron. This was no fleeting stubbornness. It was a deliberate, deepening resistance, a willful refusal to acknowledge the authority of the God of Israel. The scriptures emphasize that this hardening was both a divine act and Pharaoh's own obstinacy intertwined. The Bible states repeatedly, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. This phrase echoes throughout the narrative of the plagues, marking a tension between divine sovereignty and human free will, underscoring that Pharaoh was an instrument for God's ultimate display of power. Exodus 7 verse 13 sets this pattern early. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, neither would he let the children of Israel go, as the Lord had said. It was God who raised Pharaoh up for this very purpose, to show his power and proclaim his name throughout the earth. Exodus 9 verse 16. Yet Pharaoh's repeated refusal was also an act of defiance. His pride, the godlike status he held among the Egyptians, would not permit him to bow to any other power. This pride had been nurtured by the gods of Egypt, the Pharaoh himself viewed as divine. To release Israel was to relinquish his godlike authority. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart was progressive. At times, Pharaoh hardened his own heart, Exodus 8 verse 15, and at other times, God hardened it, Exodus 10 verse 1. This interplay shows the complexity of human will under divine purpose. Pharaoh was stubborn, but God used that stubbornness to magnify his own glory. As Pharaoh's heart hardened, his cruelty toward the Israelites increased exponentially. He moved from calculated oppression to brutal intensification of their suffering. Before Moses and Aaron's arrival, the Israelites had already been burdened with harsh labor, forced to build store cities and work in fields under the scorching sun. But Pharaoh's reaction to the demand, "Let my people go," was to increase their workload drastically. Exodus 5 verses 6 to 9 details Pharaoh's harsh command. And Pharaoh said, "Behold, the people of the land are now many, and ye make them rest from their burdens. Go therefore, get you into your works. Ye shall no more give the people straw to make brick as heretofore. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And the tale of the bricks, which they did make heretofore, ye shall lay upon them. Ye shall not diminish aught thereof, for they be idle. Therefore they cry, saying, Let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let their more work be laid upon the men, that they may labor therein, and let them not regard vain words." Pharaoh's order was ruthless. The Israelites were no longer provided the essential material, straw, for brickmaking, forcing them to forage for it themselves. This task added enormous strain. Imagine the relentless heat of the Egyptian sun beating down as enslaved men and women trampled fields, bending under the labor of collecting dry reeds. Their feet blistered, their bodies weary, their spirits crushed. And yet, despite this added toil, Pharaoh demanded the same number of bricks. There was no relief, no reduction of quotas. The taskmasters drove the Israelites relentlessly, lashing out at any perceived slackness or complaint. This cruel escalation crushed not only their bodies but their hopes. The Israelites labored from dawn till dusk, the weight of oppression heavier than ever. Families returned home exhausted, often with empty bellies, no rest, and little strength left to nurture their children or offer worship. Their cries of despair were deep and genuine. Yet, paradoxically, these crushing hardships intensified their yearning for freedom and for the God who had promised deliverance. The people's frustration and anguish began to turn toward Moses and Aaron, the leaders who had come with words of hope. Exodus 5 verses 17 to 21 illustrates the bitterness of the people. And the officers of the children of Israel did see that they were in evil case, after it was said, Ye shall not diminish aught from your bricks of your daily task. And they met Moses and Aaron, who stood before Pharaoh. And they said unto them, The Lord look upon you and judge, because ye have made our savor to be abhorred in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to slay us. The enslaved Israelites accused Moses and Aaron of bringing more suffering rather than relief. Their faith was tested. The promise of freedom seemed farther than ever. The deliverance God had promised was obscured by the tangible increase in oppression. Moses himself felt the weight of failure. He turned to God in despair. Exodus 5 verses 22 to 23 records his plea. And Moses returned unto the Lord, and said, Lord, wherefore hast thou so evil entreated this people? Why is it that thou hast sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in thy name, he hath done evil to this people. Neither hast thou delivered thy people at all. Moses was honest, transparent in his doubts and frustrations. His faith, though strong, wrestled with the reality before him. Yet, through these trials, God's ultimate plan was being revealed. The intensification of oppression was a necessary phase in the divine drama, a setting of the stage for the demonstration of God's unmatched power, justice, and mercy. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart and the increased oppression upon Israel were not signs of God's absence or weakness, but of a larger spiritual conflict, a battle between the living God and the gods of Egypt, between freedom and tyranny. This confrontation would culminate in the sequence of plagues that shook Egypt to its core, each designed to dismantle the false gods and demonstrate the sovereignty of the Lord. Throughout, God remained sovereign, compassionate, and faithful to his covenant, hearing the groans of his people and preparing to deliver them with an outstretched hand and mighty acts that would echo through history. The 10 plagues unleashed upon Egypt were not random acts of nature or mere punishments. They were a carefully orchestrated divine confrontation, each plague a sign and a wonder, designed to challenge the false gods of Egypt, to humble the proud Pharaoh, and to demonstrate the absolute sovereignty of the Lord God of Israel. First plague, water to blood. The initial strike targeted the very lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile River. Egypt depended upon the Nile for survival. Its waters brought life, fertility, and prosperity. The river was worshipped as a deity, often called Happy, revered as the source of all sustenance. Exodus 7 verses 20 to 21 recounts, "And Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded, and he lifted up the rod, and smote the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that was in the river died. And the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river. And there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt." Symbolically, this plague demonstrated God's power over the Egyptian god of the Nile and over life itself. The life-giving river became a source of death and decay. The Egyptians faced immediate and horrifying consequences. Their water poisoned, their fish dead, their source of irrigation and drinking water ruined. This plague challenged the Egyptians to recog. Second plague, frogs. The plague of frogs followed, infesting every corner of Egypt. Frogs, considered sacred creatures associated with fertility and resurrection, swarmed from the Nile into houses, bedrooms, and palaces alike. Exodus 8 verses 2 to 3 details, "And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs, and the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house, and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thy kneading troughs." Spiritually, the frogs represented the disruption of natural order and a direct assault on Egypt's deities, symbolizing fertility. The inundation of frogs was a visible sign of God's power spilling over, turning the land upside down. Third plague, gnats. With the Nile's waters now blood and Egypt inundated with frogs, God next commanded a plague of gnats, or lice, that covered man and beast. Exodus 8 verses 16 to 17 says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch out thy rod, and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod, and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man, and in beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt." The plague of gnats was a direct attack on the earth itself, the dust, the very foundation of life. This signified God's power over creation, defiling the land the Egyptians revered. The priests who claimed purity were rendered unclean by these tiny but pervasive creatures. Fourth plague, flies. The fourth plague brought swarms of flies, a nuisance and a source of disease. Exodus 8 verses 21 to 24 describes, "Else, if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses. And the Lord did so. And there came grievous swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt." Flies symbolized corruption and decay. The overwhelming presence of these pests disturbed the Egyptian order, bringing discomfort and chaos, further demonstrating Yahweh's control over nature. Fifth plague, livestock disease. The fifth plague struck at the heart of Egypt's wealth, its livestock. Exodus 9 verses 3 to 6 recounts, "Behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle which is in the field. There shall be a very grievous murrain, and all the cattle of Egypt died." Livestock were vital for economy, agriculture, and religious rituals. Their sudden death was both an economic disaster and a spiritual blow to the Egyptians, as many animals were sacred. Sixth plague, boils. The sixth plague afflicted man and beast alike with painful boils. Exodus 9 verses 9 to 11 says, "And Moses and Aaron took ashes of a furnace, and smote the people with boils, so that there were boils upon man and upon beast." Boils symbolized defilement and suffering, a visible mark of divine judgment that pierced human flesh. The priests, who were considered healers and mediators, were powerless. Seventh plague, hail. The seventh plague was a destructive hailstorm unlike any Egypt had ever seen. Exodus 9 verses 22 to 26 describes, "And there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, and the hail smote every herb of the field, and brake every tree of the field. The storm devastated crops and trees, the foundation of Egypt's agriculture and economy. This plague struck at the gods of fertility and the natural order. Eighth plague, locusts. The eighth plague was a swarm of locusts that consumed everything left by the hail. Exodus 10 verses 12 to 15 recounts. And the Lord turned a mighty strong west wind, and brought the locusts, and covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened. Locusts symbolized total destruction and judgment. Their consuming presence left Egypt desolate, unable to feed its people or sustain its wealth. Ninth plague, darkness. The ninth plague was a thick darkness covering Egypt for 3 days. Exodus 10 verses 21 to 23 describes, And there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. Darkness was symbolic of spiritual blindness and judgment, a powerful contrast to the light and presence of God with his people. 10th plague, death of the firstborn. The final and most devastating plague was the death of every firstborn in Egypt. Exodus 11 verses 4 to 6 warns, Thus saith the Lord, About midnight will I go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. This plague was the ultimate judgment upon Egypt and its gods, demonstrating God's supremacy over life and death. It was also the catalyst for Israel's release. Each plague carried spiritual weight beyond the physical destruction. They dismantled Egypt's false gods, Nile, fertility deities, sun gods, and more, revealing the Lord as the one true God. The unfolding drama between God and Pharaoh reveals, at its core, the magnificent sovereignty of the Almighty. It is a divine narrative where God, the creator of heaven and earth, the sustainer of life, demonstrates his unrivaled power over all earthly authorities and false deities. From the very outset of the confrontation, God declares his supremacy and eternal purpose. He reveals that he will not be defied nor diminished, and that through this epic contest, his name will be exalted in all the earth. Exodus 7 verses 3 to 5 proclaims, And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and bring forth mine armies, and my people the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt, and bring out the children of Israel from among them. This passage reveals a profound theological truth. God is the sovereign orchestrator of history. Even Pharaoh's stubborn resistance serves God's grand design. By hardening Pharaoh's heart, God ensures that his power will be revealed not just in the release of Israel, but in the dramatic display of wonders and judgments upon Egypt. Each miracle, each plague, was a testament to God's control over nature, life, death, and even the hearts of kings. The plagues dismantled Egypt's false gods. Water turned to blood challenged the Nile god. Frogs contested the goddess of fertility. Darkness overcame the sun god. In every act, the Lord proclaimed his unmatched lordship. God's sovereignty means he rules over nations, leaders, and cosmic forces alike. No throne is secure against his will. Pharaoh, for all his might and authority, was a mere instrument in the divine plan, destined to be humbled before the Lord. Yet Pharaoh's pride remained unyielding. His stubbornness was rooted deeply in his self-perception as a god-king, a living deity whose word was law. To submit to the God of Israel was to surrender that divine status, an unthinkable humiliation in the eyes of Egypt and the ancient world. Pharaoh's refusal was not simply a political stance but a spiritual rebellion. He arrogantly claimed ignorance of the Lord. Exodus 5 verse 2 recounts his defiant words, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. This rejection intensified the confrontation. Pharaoh's pride fortified his resistance even as God's power multiplied. The longer Pharaoh resisted, the more apparent became his folly and the more spectacular God's judgments. Exodus 9 verse 16 further illuminates the purpose of this hardening. And in very deed for this cause have I raised thee up, for to shew in thee my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Pharaoh's stubbornness served as the stage on which God would display his might. This was not a cruel divine punishment, but a sovereign plan to manifest God's glory, justice, and faithfulness in a way that would resonate beyond Egypt to all nations and generations. Thus, the epic contest between Pharaoh and God was more than political. It was cosmic. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart was a necessary drama to showcase the Lord's authority over false gods and proud kings. Pharaoh's pride was his downfall, but it was God's sovereignty that set the path to deliverance. A path marked by signs, wonders, and the unfolding of divine promises. After decades of oppression and the relentless unfolding of God's mighty judgments upon Egypt, the moment of divine redemption drew near. The institution of the Passover, a sacred ordinance established by God himself as the doorway between slavery and freedom, death and life. The narrative begins with a precise divine command given to Moses and Aaron, communicated from the very heart of God, outlining the ceremony that would mark the night when God's judgment would pass over the homes of his people, sparing them from destruction. Exodus 12 verses 1 to 7 details the first instructions. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. God designates the month of Nisan as the beginning, a fresh start, a new calendar marked by redemption. It was not merely a ritualistic observance, but the inauguration of Israel's identity as a redeemed people. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. Each family was to select a lamb that was perfect and without blemish, a male of the first year. This lamb represented purity and holiness, a sacred substitute whose blood would become their shield. And ye shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. The lamb was to be guarded and preserved until the appointed day. The killing of the lamb in the evening marked the beginning of the sacred Passover night. The significance of the lamb was profound. It was to be sacrificed as a substitute for the life of the people, an outward sign of faith in God's protective mercy. Exodus 12 verse 13 gives the pivotal command, And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. The blood was applied to the doorposts and lintels of the Israelite homes. This blood, the lifeblood of the Lamb, was the sacred sign that distinguished God's people from the rest of Egypt, the difference between death and life. Spiritually, the blood represented life itself and the concept of substitutionary atonement, where the life of one takes the place of another. This foreshadowed the ultimate Lamb, Jesus Christ, who would one day offer his blood for the salvation of humanity. The ritual included precise instructions for the meal. Unleavened bread eaten with bitter herbs and roasted lamb, eaten in haste, with sandals on feet and staff in hand, ready for immediate departure. Exodus 12 verse 11. And thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. This readiness symbolized the urgency of deliverance and the people's faith in God's promise of imminent freedom. As the final night in Egypt approached, tension filled the air. The dread of God's coming judgment was palpable. At midnight, the Lord executed the 10th and most terrible plague. Exodus 12 verses 29 to 30 recounts. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. The death of every firstborn, man and beast alike, shattered the very foundation of Egypt's society and faith. This plague was the final act that broke Pharaoh's will and opened the door for Israel's release. Yet, God's protective hand was upon his people, as the blood on their doorposts signaled divine mercy. The impact of the Passover went beyond the immediate deliverance. God commanded that the Passover be commemorated annually, a perpetual memorial across generations. Exodus 12:14. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. The Passover became a sacred tradition, a reminder of God's redemption, a symbol of deliverance, and a foreshadowing of the ultimate salvation offered through the Lamb of God. Theologically, the Passover reveals God's character as both righteous judge and merciful redeemer. It embodies themes of judgment upon sin and grace extended through substitution. The blood of the Lamb, marking the doorposts, signifies God's covenant love, life given for life, protection from death. The deliverance of Israel from Egypt's bondage was not merely a historical event, but a profound spiritual reality, a foundational act defining God's relationship with his people. This mighty act was accompanied by God's visible presence leading Israel on their journey out of bondage. Exodus 13 verse 21. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud, to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire, to give them light. The pillar of cloud and fire symbolized God's guidance, protection, and unceasing presence with his people as they embarked upon the path to freedom. As the final hour of judgment approached, a profound silence descended over the land of Egypt, a calm before the storm of divine wrath. This was no ordinary night, but a moment when the eternal God would execute the ultimate act of judgment, the climax of his confrontation with Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt. God had spoken to Moses and Aaron, revealing the mechanism of his judgment, the passing of the destroyer, the angel of death, who would sweep through Egypt, striking down every firstborn, from the palace of Pharaoh to the humblest home. Exodus 12 verse 23 foretells, For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel, and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. This passing over was literal and spiritual, a divine act of mercy for those covered by the blood of the Lamb, and of righteous judgment for those exposed. At midnight, the angel of death moved with silent, deadly precision. The stillness of the night was shattered by the wails of Egypt. Exodus 12 verses 29 to 30 declares, And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. Every household, every family, every structure felt the blow of divine judgment. The firstborn son, the heir, the hope, the future was struck down. This was a judgment against the gods of Egypt who claimed dominion over life and death. It was a shattering declaration. The God of Israel is the Lord over life and death. The land of Egypt was plunged into mourning. The grief was universal and overwhelming. Exodus 12 verses 30 to 31 says, And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up, get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. Pharaoh's resistance broke in the face of unimaginable loss. The weight of grief and fear compelled him to release Israel. The people of Israel, bound by centuries of slavery, stood at the cusp of freedom. Yet their deliverance was not merely political. It was a sacred exodus, a liberation wrought by the mighty hand of God, who remembered his covenant and fulfilled his promise. This night of darkness and death was also a night of light and life for Israel. Protected by the blood on their doorposts, they were spared and set apart. Exodus 12 verse 27 records the declaration to the people. It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. The Passover was the boundary between death and life, bondage and freedom. As Pharaoh finally relented, the Israelites prepared for departure, eager to escape the land that had held them captive. Exodus 12 verses 31 to 34 describes the urgency. And he called for Moses and Aaron, and said, Go ye, serve the Lord, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste. And the people borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver, and jewels of gold and raiment. The Egyptians, struck by fear and awe, urged Israel to leave quickly, giving them treasures as a sign of release and favor. Thus, the mighty hand of God was revealed, not only in judgment but in salvation, leading a nation out of darkness into covenantal freedom. With the devastating judgment having struck Egypt and the hardened heart of Pharaoh finally broken, the long-awaited moment of Israel's deliverance arrived, the beginning of the Exodus. The people of Israel, once enslaved and bound by cruel taskmasters, now stood on the precipice of freedom, a nation poised to journey from bondage into a new life of covenantal relationship with their God. Exodus 12 verses 37 to 38 recounts the departure. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. This was not a small migration but a vast movement of humanity. 600,000 men, plus women and children, accompanied by livestock and others who had joined in the hope of liberation. The Exodus was a monumental event, the largest departure of a people from slavery recorded in history. The departure was marked by solemn preparation and sacred observance. They carried with them the memory of the Passover night, the blood that had saved them, and the promise that God was their Redeemer. God did not merely free his people to wander aimlessly. He was their guide and protector. His presence would accompany them, manifesting visibly to assure them of his constant care. Exodus 13 verses 21 to 22 proclaims, "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud, to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire, to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people." These pillars, the cloud by day and fire by night, were profound symbols of God's presence and guidance. The cloud represented God's protective covering and the mystery of his divine will, shielding his people from the harshness of the desert sun and the dangers of the journey. The fire illuminated the night, offering warmth, safety, and assurance in the darkness. The pillars were more than mere physical phenomena. They were tangible reminders that Israel's God was not a distant deity, but an ever-present guide who marched ahead, leading his people step by step toward their destiny. The cloud and fire were visible assurances that the journey was divinely ordained. They brought order to the wilderness, directing the vast host when to march, when to camp, and when to rest. In the face of unknown deserts, rocky terrain, and harsh climates, Israel found comfort and courage in these signs, God's living presence moving before them. Spiritually, the pillars symbolize God's covenant faithfulness. The cloud recalls his glory that once filled the tabernacle, while the fire recalls the burning bush encounter, both manifestations of holy presence. The passage through the wilderness was not merely physical liberation but a spiritual pilgrimage from slavery to covenant identity, from fear to faith, from death to life. God's leading in cloud and fire set the tone for Israel's journey, one marked by divine guidance, supernatural protection, and the unfolding revelation of God's character and covenant promises. Though Pharaoh had reluctantly released the children of Israel from Egypt, his submission was superficial and short-lived. The sting of defeat and loss gnawed at his pride and shattered his authority. Pharaoh, the self-proclaimed god of Egypt, could not accept that his subjects, once enslaved and oppressed, had been freed to walk away from his dominion. His heart burned with a fierce resolve to reclaim what he considered his property and to restore his broken reputation. As the dawn broke over Egypt, the mighty king gathered his army, elite chariots, seasoned horsemen, and foot soldiers, and prepared for a pursuit that would become one of the most dramatic military endeavors recorded in history. The biblical narrative captures this turning point in Exodus 14 verses 5 to 7. "And when the king of Egypt was told that the people fled, the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And they said, 'Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us?' And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him, and took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. Pharaoh's resolve galvanized his forces. 600 of the best chariots, each manned by skilled captains, were unleashed in a relentless pursuit. The word chosen signifies the elite, the crème de la crème of Egyptian military might, a force carefully selected to annihilate the escaping Israelites. As Pharaoh's army advanced, the Israelites were encamped by the Red Sea, their backs against an impassable barrier of water and their front threatened by the approaching storm of Egyptian forces. Yet, amidst this tension, the Lord's presence remained a visible and powerful reality among his people. Exodus 14 verses 19 to 20 reveals a crucial spiritual and physical element. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these. Here, the angel of God and the pillar of cloud manifest in a remarkable way, moving from the front of the Israelite camp to stand behind them. This divine maneuver positioned a protective barrier between the Israelites and the Egyptian army. To the Egyptians, it was a cloud of darkness, a terrifying and impenetrable gloom that obscured their view and disrupted their advance. To the Israelites, however, it was a pillar of light by night, a beacon of hope and reassurance in the darkness. This dual nature of the cloud symbolized the Lord's protection and judgment simultaneously. It shielded his people while confusing and terrifying their enemies. The thick cloud served as both a literal and spiritual wall, underscoring God's sovereignty over nature and his intimate involvement in the salvation of his people. It manifested his presence in a tangible form, reminiscent of the glory cloud that filled the tabernacle, signaling God's holy presence among Israel. Exodus 14 verse 24 adds, "And it came to pass, that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians." God actively intervened in the conflict, causing panic and confusion within Pharaoh's ranks. The pillar of fire and cloud was not passive but an agent of divine power, unsettling the formidable Egyptian army. As the Egyptians closed in, the Israelites remained encamped, watching the unfolding drama with a mixture of fear and awe. The presence of God, visible and palpable, filled them with reassurance even as the enemy approached. Pharaoh's forces, though mighty, were at the mercy of the divine presence. The natural elements themselves were instruments in God's hand. Clouds, darkness, and fire were not mere weather phenomena but manifestations of his power. The tension reached a crescendo as Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and God commanded the waters to part, creating a pathway of deliverance. Exodus 14 verses 26 to 28 continues the narrative. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, and the waters returned, and covered the chariots, and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them." The Egyptian army was engulfed and destroyed by the returning waters, a divine judgment executed with overwhelming power. This event was not only a military victory but a spiritual triumph, the definitive demonstration of God's dominion over all powers, human and natural. The pursuit by Pharaoh's army and the miraculous deliverance of Israel highlight the interplay of divine sovereignty and human will. Pharaoh's pride led to his downfall, while God's mighty hand brought salvation to his people. The moment had arrived, the critical juncture where history would pivot, where the boundary between slavery and freedom would be irrevocably crossed. The vast host of Israel, numbering hundreds of thousands, stood trapped before a mighty barrier of water, the Red Sea, while behind them the thunderous roar of Pharaoh's pursuing army grew ever nearer. Moses stood at the edge of this great expanse, the rod of God gripped firmly in his hand. This rod was no ordinary shepherd's staff. It was a divine instrument, a symbol of authority bestowed by the Lord, the very emblem through which God would enact deliverance. The atmosphere was thick with tension and expectancy. The Israelites watched with anxious hearts, the sea before them and the enemy behind them. Yet Moses, emboldened by faith and the power of God, lifted his staff high toward the horizon. Exodus 14 verse 16 commands, "Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." At Moses' gesture, the winds began to stir. A powerful east wind, described as strong, commenced its relentless work, whipping across the surface of the waters. For hours all through the night, this wind drove back the sea, forcing the waters to recede, revealing the seabed beneath. Exodus 14 verse 21 recounts this miraculous act. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. The sea parted, not by the hand of man, but by the command of the Almighty, through the instrument of Moses' lifted rod. The waters withdrew, forming towering walls on both sides, held back by the invisible power of God. The seabed, once a realm of chaos and depth, transformed into a dry pathway, a corridor of salvation. For the Israelites, this path was not just physical. It was a journey into a new reality. Their feet pressed against the sand and rock of the ocean floor, walking between walls of shimmering water that stretched skyward like colossal, translucent towers. Drops of water clung to these walls, glistening like jewels in the moonlight, while the sound of the sea's restrained power filled the air. A mighty river held back by divine will. Exodus 14 verse 22 reveals the scale of the movement. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. The phrase walls of water paints an awe-inspiring picture. Walls so high that they dwarfed the people, protecting them on either side from the chaos of the sea. The path was narrow but secure, a divine sanctuary carved in the heart of the tempest. The experience was both terrifying and miraculous. The Israelites walked in faith, trusting the God who had delivered them time and again. The sea's bottom was firm, and the air was thick with the miraculous presence of God. Meanwhile, the Egyptian army charged forward, confident in their pursuit. They plunged into the sea after Israel, unaware that their doom awaited. Exodus 14 verses 23 to 24 describes their advance. And the Egyptians pursued, and went in after them to the midst of the sea. And it came to pass, that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians. God's intervention continued beyond the parting. The pillar of fire and cloud, symbols of divine presence, disoriented and terrified the Egyptians. The natural order itself was turned against them. Then came the final act of deliverance. Moses, still holding the rod, stretched out his hand once more over the sea. Exodus 14 verses 26 to 27 states, And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared. The waters surged back with irresistible force. The walls collapsed, drowning Pharaoh's chariots, horsemen, and entire army. Not a single pursuer escaped. This overwhelming display of power was absolute judgment against Egypt and a definitive victory for Israel. Spiritually, the parting of the Red Sea symbolizes God's triumph over chaos, evil, and death. The sea, often depicted as the abode of chaos and destruction, was subdued by God's sovereign hand, creating a way where no way existed. Moses' lifted rod represents God's authority working through human obedience. The act of raising the staff was not mere symbolism but an act of faith that unleashed divine power. For Israel, crossing the sea was a baptismal passage, death to their old life of slavery and birth into a new existence as God's chosen people. The walls of water served as a tangible reminder that God alone is the protector and redeemer. The miraculous event resounded through time as the defining moment when God saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. Exodus 14 verse 30. The parting of the Red Sea remains one of the greatest demonstrations of God's power, love, and faithfulness. A timeless testament to the fact that with God, even the impossible becomes possible. In the immediate aftermath of the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea and the total destruction of Pharaoh's army, the people of Israel erupted in jubilant praise. Their hearts overflowed with gratitude and awe, for God had done the impossible. He had delivered them from slavery by his own mighty hand. This moment of deliverance gave rise to the ancient and profound Song of Moses, a sacred hymn of triumph and thanksgiving, recorded in Exodus 15. It is not merely a song of victory but a theological declaration, a celebration of God's power, justice, faithfulness, and holiness. Exodus 15 verses 1-2 begins the song with triumphant joy. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The opening verses declare God as the triumphant warrior who defeated the mighty chariots of Egypt, casting them into the sea as if they were insignificant. This vivid imagery highlights God's unparalleled strength, unmatched by any human or divine adversary. The horse and rider symbolize the earthly power of Egypt, its military might, and its oppressive regime. Yet all these were rendered powerless before the hand of the Lord. The song continues to extol God as both strength and song, revealing that God is the source of victory and the very reason for Israel's joyful worship. The people commit to prepare a habitation for God, an expression of desire to dwell in his presence and honor him continuously. The song's theological richness unfolds further. God is my salvation, the deliverer who has enacted a new reality for his people. Exodus 15 verses 3-5 proclaims, The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. Here, God is described in the imagery of a warrior, one who fights on behalf of his people. Unlike the gods of Egypt, who were powerless idols, the Lord is a living, active, victorious God engaged in battle for his covenant people. The drowning of Pharaoh's captains and army in the depths emphasizes the totality of God's judgment and the finality of Israel's liberation. Exodus 15 verses 6-7 elaborates, Thy right hand, O Lord, is become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, hath dashed in pieces the enemy. And in the greatness of thine excellency thou hast overthrown them that rose up against thee. Thou sentest forth thy wrath, which consumed them as stubble. The right hand of God is a biblical metaphor for power and authority. God's right hand dashes in pieces the enemies, demonstrating that his might is both effective and decisive. The imagery of consuming wrath likened to burning stubble conveys the swiftness and completeness of divine judgment against those who oppose him. This hymn also acknowledges the fearful reverence inspired by God's power. Exodus 15 verse 11 asks, Who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? The song contrasts the Lord with all other gods, highlighting his uniqueness. God's holiness, his perfect moral purity and otherness, commands awe and worship. God's wonders, performed in history and nature, inspire both praise and fear. The song celebrates the paradox of God's character, glorious yet fearful, powerful yet merciful. As the song unfolds, it recounts God's guidance of Israel through the wilderness. Exodus 15 verses 13-16 paints a vivid picture of God's faithful leadership. Thou in thy mercy hast led forth the people which thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength unto thy holy habitation. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. God's mercy and strength lead his people toward the promised land, the holy habitation. This reminds Israel that their journey is both physical and spiritual, toward communion with God. The song prophesies the fear and trembling that Egypt's enemies will experience upon hearing of God's mighty acts. Exodus 15 verses 17-18 concludes with a triumphant declaration, Thou shalt bring them in, and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. God promises to establish Israel in the promised land, his inheritance, and reign as eternal king over all. The Song of Moses thus serves multiple functions. Historical remembrance. It commemorates the miraculous deliverance from Egypt, a watershed moment in Israel's identity. Theological proclamation. It declares God's sovereignty, holiness, power, and faithfulness. Liturgical worship. It provides a model for praise, blending joy, reverence, and awe. Prophetic hope. It anticipates the future establishment of God's kingdom and the eternal reign of the Lord. For the Israelites, this song was a spiritual anchor in the midst of uncertainty, a declaration that their God is victorious, present, and worthy of eternal praise. The vast multitude of Israel, freshly delivered from the iron grasp of Egypt, now faced a new and daunting challenge: survival in the barren wilderness. No longer captive, they were free to roam, but freedom came with the harsh realities of the desert's unforgiving landscape. The freedom they sought was not yet fully realized, for the journey ahead would test their faith, character, and trust in the God who had redeemed them. Exodus 16 opens with a sobering scene. The people, thousands strong, began to murmur against Moses and Aaron, voices rising in complaint and despair. Exodus 16 verses 2-3 reveals their heartache. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness, to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Here, their words echo with raw anguish and bitter nostalgia. They longed, even for the captivity of Egypt, rather than face the uncertainty and hunger of the wilderness. Their memories, though tainted by suffering, seemed preferable to the stark emptiness before them. Their grumbling was not merely about hunger. It was a test of their trust. Would they believe that the God who brought them out would also sustain them every day? Or would fear and doubt consume their hope? God, in his infinite mercy and patience, responded with a miraculous provision, the promise of manna, bread from heaven. Exodus 16 verses 4-5 records God's command to Moses. Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, and it shall come to pass, that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. The provision was to be daily, teaching the people dependence on God's faithful hand and the sanctity of the Sabbath rest. When the manna appeared, it was a humble, mysterious substance, fine as frost on the ground, white and sweet like wafers made with honey. Exodus 16 verses 14-15 describes, And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoar frost on the ground. The people of Israel said one to another, It is manna. The name manna itself, traditionally understood as what is it, in Hebrew, reflects the wonder and uncertainty with which the people regarded this new sustenance. Each morning, the people would rise to gather their portion, exactly as much as needed, no more, no less. This daily rhythm was God's way of nurturing trust, teaching them to rely on his timing and sufficiency. Yet, some tested the command and attempted to hoard manna overnight. The results were disastrous. The manna bred worms and stank, teaching obedience and dependence. Exodus 16 verses 19-20 warns, Let no man leave of it till the morning. But they hearkened not unto Moses. Some left of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. The manna was not merely food. It was a divine lesson woven into daily life. The people also soon faced the trial of thirst. Exodus 17 recounts their cry for water. And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? Exodus 17 verse 2. Their complaints again reflected fear and doubt, questioning God's care in the harsh wilderness. God instructed Moses to strike a specific rock at Horeb, from which water miraculously flowed, sustaining the people and their animals. Jethro urged Moses to delegate authority. appointing able men as judges over smaller groups to share the workload. Exodus 18 verses 21 to 22. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, and let them judge the people at all seasons. This system of leadership ensured justice, efficiency, and mercy, principles foundational to Israel's society and reflective of God's governance. The wilderness journey was thus marked by physical provision, spiritual testing, and the formation of wise leadership. God's daily manna taught reliance. The rock's water revealed his life-giving power. The delegation of authority demonstrated the importance of shared responsibility. Through grumbling and grace, the Israelites learned to trust the God who led them by his cloud, fed them by his hand, and guided them toward the promised land. As the Israelites trudged through the barren wilderness, their stomachs echoed with emptiness, and their hearts wrestled with doubt and fear. Freed from the chains of Egypt but confronted with the stark reality of the desert, their journey became not only a physical migration but a profound spiritual test of God's provision and faithfulness. The people's murmuring over hunger intensified, a natural human response to the harsh and unyielding desert environment. In response, God prepared to demonstrate his abundant mercy in a way that was both miraculous and deeply instructive, by providing manna, the bread from heaven, and later quail, a rich meat to satisfy their cravings. Exodus 16 verses 11 to 15 recounts the first manifestation of manna. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, At even ye shall eat flesh, and in the morning ye shall be filled with bread, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God. This promise revealed God's intimate awareness of the people's needs and his readiness to supply them abundantly. His provision was not abstract or distant but immediate and personal. At evening, quail descended in great flocks upon the camp, filling the air with the flutter of wings and the cries of birds, a divine gift of meat that satisfied the people's longing. Exodus 16 verse 13 says, And it came to pass, that at even the quails came up, and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the host. The quail represented God's generous provision of sustenance beyond their daily bread, a fulfillment of the promise of meat for their hunger. But it was the manna that became the central miracle and daily lesson for the Israelites. Each morning, when the dew evaporated, a fine, flaky substance lay upon the ground, white and glistening like frost. The people gathered it in exact portions. Exodus 16 verses 31 to 32 describes the manna. And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Gather of it every man according to his eating. The manna's appearance was modest yet extraordinary. Its taste, reminiscent of honeyed wafers, provided not only nourishment but sweetness, a symbol of God's goodness even in hardship. God's instructions were explicit. The manna was to be gathered daily, a sufficient portion for each person. On the sixth day, the portion was doubled to prepare for the Sabbath rest. Exodus 16 verse 23 commands, Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which ye will bake today, and seethe that ye will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. This ritual instilled in the people a pattern of reliance and obedience, honoring the Sabbath as a sacred day of rest, acknowledging God as the ultimate provider. Yet the people's obedience was imperfect. Some disregarded the command, hoarding manna overnight, only to find it spoiled and crawling with worms. Exodus 16 verse 20 warns, Notwithstanding they hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank, and Moses was wroth with them. This consequence underscored the spiritual principle of trust and obedience. God's provision was perfect for each day, and reliance on him required faithfulness. Beyond physical sustenance, manna symbolized God's covenantal faithfulness, his ability to meet needs in impossible circumstances, and his desire to teach his people dependence on him alone. The provision of quail supplemented this miracle, reminding Israel that God's grace is abundant, sometimes surprising, and always timely. Psalm 78 verses 24 to 25 reflects on this provision. And had rained down manna upon them to eat, and gave them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. Manna became a symbol of spiritual sustenance, prefiguring Christ, the bread of life, who would satisfy the deepest hunger of the human soul. In this wilderness setting, God was not only feeding physical bodies but nourishing faith, shaping character, and preparing his people for the journey ahead. After the Israelites had experienced God's miraculous provision of manna and quail, their journey through the wilderness brought them to a new trial, a place called Rephidim. Here, a crisis arose that tested their faith anew, the desperate need for water in a barren land. Exodus 17 verses 1 to 3 recounts the stark reality. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin, as the Lord commanded, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water that we may drink. The people's murmuring revealed a deep anxiety. Water was essential not only for their survival but for the survival of their livestock. The desert, with its relentless heat and dryness, offered no sustenance. The absence of water was a threat to life itself. The people's complaint to Moses was sharp and filled with frustration. Why is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? Exodus 17 verse 3. This bitter question echoed the same distrust that had surfaced with the manna. The harsh conditions tempted the people to doubt God's care and Moses' leadership, forgetting the recent miraculous deliverance. God's response was direct and authoritative. He instructed Moses to take his staff, the same staff that had wrought signs before Pharaoh, and to strike a specific rock at Horeb. Exodus 17 verses 5 to 6 commands, And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smotest the river, take in thine hand, and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. This was a pivotal moment. God was about to demonstrate his power over nature once more, turning a lifeless rock into a source of abundant water. Moses obeyed, striking the rock with his rod as the people watched in desperate anticipation. Exodus 17 verse 6 continues, And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. From the rock gushed forth water, flowing freely, a sustaining river in the midst of desolation. The provision of water from the rock was not only a physical miracle but a powerful symbol. The rock represented God himself, solid, dependable, life-giving. In the New Testament, this imagery finds its fulfillment in Christ, the living rock who provides living water to all who believe. Spiritually, the miracle illustrated that God's provision is often found in unexpected places, accessible to those who trust and obey. Moreover, this event was a test of faith. The Israelites had to rely once again on God's word and Moses' leadership, affirming that survival in the wilderness depended not on their own resources but on divine intervention. The episode at Rephidim also had deeper covenantal significance. It reinforced the reality that God was shaping a people who would live by his word and depend on his provision. This miracle echoed the sustaining presence of God in the wilderness and the unfolding journey from slavery toward a land flowing with milk and honey. As the children of Israel continued their arduous journey through the wilderness, emerging from one test of faith and provision into another, they encountered a new and formidable challenge, an unexpected attack by the Amalekites. This was not merely a physical battle but a spiritual confrontation that would test the unity, faith, and leadership of the people God was shaping. The Amalekites, a nomadic tribe notorious for their hostility toward Israel, launched a sudden and aggressive assault upon the Israelites at Rephidim, catching them off guard. Exodus 17 verses 8 to 9 describes the initial attack. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men, and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. Joshua, the military commander and faithful servant, was charged with leading the people into battle. This moment marked a pivotal transition for Joshua's leadership as he took on the role of defender of God's people. Moses, recognizing the spiritual dimension of the conflict, positioned himself on the summit of a nearby hill, holding in his hand the rod of God, the very symbol of divine authority and power that had wrought miracles in Egypt and at the rock of Horeb. The battle unfolded with Joshua and the Israelite army engaging the Amalekites in fierce combat below, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur ascended the hill. Exodus 17 verses 10 to 11 records the dramatic scene. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. This imagery is striking, the outcome of the battle directly tied to the position of Moses' hands. When his hands were raised in prayer and intercession, Israel gained the advantage. When they grew weary and lowered, the enemy pressed forward. Seeing the strain on Moses, Aaron and Hur took a remarkable step to sustain him. Exodus 17 verse 12 continues, "But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side, and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun." This cooperative act of support symbolizes the power of communal intercession and leadership. The victory was not achieved by Moses alone, but through the united efforts of the leaders and the people. It reflects the biblical principle that spiritual warfare and leadership require mutual support and perseverance. As a result, Israel triumphed over Amalek. Exodus 17 verse 13 concludes, "And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword." This victory was both military and spiritual, a testimony to God's faithfulness to those who trust and obey him. Following the battle, God gave Moses a divine command to record this event for future generations, underscoring its significance. Exodus 17 verses 14 to 16 states, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for he will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." And Moses built an altar, and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. "The Lord is my banner." The altar named Jehovah Nissi, meaning "the Lord is my banner," was a tangible monument to God's victory and presence. It declared that God was the standard and rallying point for Israel's battles, both physical and spiritual. The conflict with Amalek thus transcended a mere historical skirmish. It became an enduring symbol of the ongoing struggle between God's people and their enemies, a reminder that spiritual vigilance and reliance on divine power are essential for victory. This narrative illustrates profound themes: God's provision of leadership through Moses and Joshua, the importance of prayer and intercession represented by Moses' raised hands, the necessity of communal support in leadership, and the assurance that God fights alongside his people. Israel's victory over Amalek was a foundational moment in the wilderness journey, reinforcing their dependence on God's power and foreshadowing the battles to come on the path toward the Promised Land. As the people of Israel journeyed through the wilderness, the weight of leadership rested heavily upon Moses' shoulders. He was not only the spiritual and political leader of a nation numbering in the hundreds of thousands, but also their primary judge, mediator, and problem solver. From the morning till the evening, Moses sat at the entrance of the tent of meeting, hearing the disputes, settling conflicts, and teaching the statutes of God. This burden was immense, relentless, and overwhelming. The scriptures provide a vivid picture of Moses' toil and isolation. The crowd continuously came to him seeking justice and guidance, and Moses bore the entire load himself. Recognizing the strain on his son-in-law, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, visited the Israelite camp. Observing Moses' exhausting routine and the continuous throng of people, Jethro offered wise counsel born from experience and divine insight. Exodus 18 verses 13 to 18 vividly captures this moment. "And it came to pass on the morrow, that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, What is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone? and all the people stand by thee from morning unto even. Thou wilt surely wear away, both thou and this people that is with thee. For this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Jethro's words were both an observation and a warning. Moses was on the brink of physical, emotional, and spiritual exhaustion, and the people's welfare was at risk. Then Jethro proposed a system of shared leadership to ease Moses' burden and to promote justice throughout the camp. Exodus 18:21-23 outlines this wise solution. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all seasons. And it shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. So shall it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. This system delegated authority by assigning trustworthy, God-fearing, and honest men to smaller groups within the community. These leaders would handle routine disputes and matters, escalating only significant cases to Moses. Such an arrangement balanced efficiency with fairness, ensuring justice was accessible without overwhelming a single individual. Jethro's counsel was rooted in a profound understanding of human limitations and divine principles. He recognized that wise delegation is essential for effective governance and sustainable leadership. By sharing responsibility, Moses could focus on his calling without being consumed by the unending demands. Moses accepted this counsel, implementing the system among the Israelites, bringing order and relief to the nation's governance. This episode is not only about organizational wisdom but about a spiritual principle, recognizing human limitations and trusting God's provision through others. Meanwhile, Israel as a whole was on a journey of learning dependence on God, moving from skepticism and complaint to faith and obedience. The wilderness experience continually tested their trust. Their hunger and thirst revealed both their physical frailty and spiritual immaturity. God's daily provision of manna taught them that their lives depended on His sustaining power. Exodus 16 verse 4 reminded them, "I will rain bread from heaven for you, that I may prove them, whether they will walk in my law or no." The provision was a test of obedience and faith. The people had to gather only enough for each day, except before the Sabbath, when double portions were given to honor rest. When some disobeyed, hoarding manna that spoiled overnight, God's correction taught the consequences of distrust and disobedience. Their experience at Rephidim, thirsting for water and complaining again, brought the miraculous water from the rock, revealing God as the living source of life. These events gradually shaped Israel's identity, from a group of freed slaves to a covenant people wholly dependent on God's guidance and provision. Through trials, provision, and the wise counsel of Jethro, Israel learned that leadership must be shared and that ultimate reliance must be placed in the Lord, the God who led them by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. This divine human partnership formed the foundation of Israel's journey toward nationhood, sanctified by faith, obedience, and communal responsibility. After weeks of wandering through the vast wilderness, guided by the visible presence of the Lord in the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, the children of Israel arrived at a significant and sacred destination, Mount Sinai. Exodus 19 verses 1-2 records the moment. In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. For they were departed from Rephidim, and were come to the desert of Sinai, and had pitched in the wilderness, and Israel camped before the mount. This arrival was not merely a geographical milestone. It was a spiritual threshold. The people stood on the cusp of a new chapter, a divine covenant relationship that would shape their identity and destiny. Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb, was a place steeped in divine significance. It was here that God would reveal His holiness, His law, and His covenant with Israel. The mountain symbolized the meeting point between heaven and earth, between God and man. The atmosphere around Sinai was charged with anticipation and awe. God commanded Moses to prepare the people for an encounter unlike any before. Exodus 19 verses 10-11 instructed, "And the Lord said unto Moses, "Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai." Sanctification, the setting apart of the people, was required to approach the holy God. This included washing their clothes, symbolic of purity and preparation, a call to holiness. The people were warned to set boundaries around the mountain to prevent unauthorized access, emphasizing the sacredness and danger of approaching God's presence unprepared. Exodus 19 verses 12 to 13 says, "And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves, that ye go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever toucheth the mount shall be surely put to death." This strict command underscored the absolute holiness of God. The mountain was a holy place, and to approach God required reverence and obedience. On the appointed third day, the mountain was enveloped in thunder, lightning, dense clouds, and the blast of a trumpet. The entire mountain trembled violently. Exodus 19 verses 16 to 18 recounts, "And it came to pass on the third day in the morning, that there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the whole mount quaked greatly." The sensory experience was overwhelming. Smoke billowed like from a furnace, the earth shook, and the sound of the trumpet pierced the heavens. This manifestation was the visible glory of God descending upon Sinai, a holy and fearsome revelation. The people's response was one of terror and awe. Exodus 19 verses 17 to 18 describes, "And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire." The divine presence was both majestic and terrifying, evoking a profound fear of God. The mountain, enveloped in fire and smoke, represented God's purity, power, and judgment. God's voice thundered from the mountain, initiating a covenant with Israel, a solemn, binding agreement defining the relationship between God and his chosen people. Exodus 19 verses 5 to 6 proclaims, "Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and an holy nation." This covenant demanded obedience and faithfulness. Israel was called to be distinct, a holy nation set apart to represent God to the world. They were to be a kingdom of priests, mediators between God and the nations. The covenant emphasized holiness, the necessity of moral purity, ethical living, and reverential fear of God. The people's fear was not merely terror but a profound respect for the holiness of God. Exodus 20 verses 18 to 19, though from the following chapter, echoes this sentiment. "And all the people saw the thunderings, and the lightnings, and the noise of the trumpet, and they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." The people recognized the overwhelming holiness of God and the danger of approaching him unmediated. This fear was the foundation for the giving of the law, the divine instructions that would guide Israel's life and worship. Mount Sinai's arrival thus marked the beginning of a covenant relationship, a divine contract that was both a privilege and a responsibility, rooted in God's holiness, justice, and love. The events at Sinai shaped Israel's identity as a people set apart to reflect God's character and to live in obedience to his word. As the children of Israel stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, enveloped in the awe-inspiring display of divine presence, they were called to prepare themselves for an encounter with the holy God, a preparation that required holiness, consecration, and reverence. God's command to Moses was clear. The people must consecrate themselves, set themselves apart from sin and impurity, to approach the mountain of the Lord. Exodus 19 verses 10 to 11 records this solemn instruction. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people, and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai." Washing clothes symbolized purification, a ritual cleansing to prepare both body and soul. The Israelites were to demonstrate outward and inward holiness in readiness for the divine encounter. This consecration was not merely ceremonial. It was a profound act of humility and obedience, acknowledging the infinite holiness of God. The Israelites were warned to keep a strict boundary around the mountain. Exodus 19 verses 12 to 13 emphasizes, "And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves, that ye go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever toucheth the mount shall be surely put to death." This warning underscored the sacredness of the place. The mountain was the dwelling place of God's glory, a holy ground where human sinfulness could not approach without judgment. The boundary served as a visible reminder of the need for reverence and obedience. On the appointed day, the third day, the heavens opened in a magnificent and terrifying display. The mountain was shrouded in dense, swirling smoke as fire blazed upon its summit, signaling the visible descent of the Almighty. Exodus 19 verses 16 to 18 narrates, "And it came to pass on the third day in the morning, that there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly." The sensory experience was overwhelming. Thunder crashed, lightning flashed, and the blast of the trumpet echoed like the voice of the Almighty himself. The thick smoke enveloped the mountain, obscuring it from sight, while the earth shook beneath the people's feet. This was no ordinary event but a powerful manifestation of God's presence. Holy, fearful, and majestic. The fire on the mountain's peak symbolized God's purifying holiness and consuming judgment. Fire in Scripture often represents both God's presence and his power to refine and cleanse. The trembling of the mountain and the people expressed the natural response to such divine glory. Fear and awe gripped every heart. The Israelites understood that they stood before a God who was infinitely holy and just. Exodus 20 verses 18 to 19 captures their fear. "And all the people saw the thunderings, and the lightnings, and the noise of the trumpet. And they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." They desired to hear God's words through Moses, the mediator, recognizing that direct encounter with God's glory was overwhelming, even terrifying. This moment of consecration and divine descent marked the inauguration of the Sinai covenant, a solemn agreement between God and his people, framed by holiness, obedience, and the fear of the Lord. The thunder, fire, smoke, and trembling formed a backdrop that would forever shape Israel's understanding of God's character. They revealed God as majestic and holy, worthy of reverence and obedience, and as one who demands purity from those who would draw near. This sacred encounter set the stage for the giving of the law, the instructions that would govern Israel's life, worship, and relationship with God and neighbor. Amidst the thick smoke, the roaring thunder, and the blinding flashes of lightning upon Mount Sinai, the Lord God prepared to impart a set of divine statutes, the 10 Commandments, etched not just in stone, but into the very soul of his people. This moment would forever mark the foundation of Israel's covenant relationship and the moral order for humanity. Exodus 20 verses 1 to 2 begins with the divine declaration. "And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." God began by reminding Israel of his identity and his mighty act of deliverance. Their obedience to the coming commandments was not based on abstract morality, but on the reality of a God who had personally redeemed them. The first commandment proclaimed the exclusive worship of Yahweh. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Exodus 20 verse 3. This was a call to absolute loyalty. In a world awash with idols and false gods, Israel was to worship only the one true God. This exclusivity established the very heart of their faith, a covenantal relationship marked by fidelity. The second commandment forbade the making of idols or images, Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. Exodus 20 verses 4-5. This command protected the people from idolatry, the temptation to reduce the infinite God to finite representations. It underscored that God transcended all physical forms, and that worship must be directed to Him alone. The third commandment warned against misuse of God's name. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Exodus 20 verse 7. God's name was holy, reflecting His nature and authority. Misusing it dishonored the very character of God and was a grave offense. The fourth commandment instituted the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Exodus 20 verse 8. This command established a sacred rhythm of rest and worship, a weekly reminder of God's creative power and redemption. The Sabbath was a sign of holiness, inviting Israel to cease from labor and focus on their covenant relationship. The fifth commandment honored the family structure. Honor thy father and thy mother. Exodus 20 verse 12. Respect for parents was foundational to social order and longevity within the land God promised. The sixth through ninth commandments addressed interpersonal ethics, prohibitions against murder, adultery, theft, and false witness, forming the basis for just and compassionate living. Exodus 20 verses 13-16 states, Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. These laws fostered a community rooted in respect for life, integrity, and truth. 6. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. Exodus 20 verse 13. This command upholds the sanctity of human life, created in God's image. It forbids unlawful taking of life, promoting justice, peace, and respect for others. It sets a moral boundary that values every person and condemns violence, murder, and injustice. 7. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Exodus 20 verse 14. This command protects the sanctity of marriage and sexual fidelity. Adultery breaks trust and harms families and communities. It calls for purity, faithfulness, and honoring the covenant of marriage as a sacred institution established by God. 8. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not steal. Exodus 20 verse 15. Respect for others' property and rights is foundational to justice. This command forbids theft and dishonesty, emphasizing integrity and fairness in relationships and community life. 9. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Exodus 20 verse 16. Truthfulness is essential for justice. This command forbids lying, slander, and deceit, protecting reputation and ensuring fair treatment. It cultivates trust and harmony in society. 10. Thou shalt not covet. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Exodus 20 verse 17. This command strikes at the root of many sins, the desire for what belongs to another. Covetousness breeds jealousy, envy, and strife. God calls for contentment and gratitude, trusting His provision rather than lusting after what others possess. These 10 commandments form the heart of God's law, a holy standard that reveals His character and will. They guide Israel's worship, community life, and personal conduct, shaping a people set apart to reflect God's holiness. The giving of these commandments was accompanied by thunder, lightning, and the sound of a trumpet, underscoring their divine origin and authority. Exodus 20 verses 18-19 records, And all the people saw the thunderings, and the lightnings, and the noise of the trumpet, and they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. The people's reverence and fear confirmed the holiness of the occasion and the weight of the covenant. But as Moses prepared to descend, God disclosed the terrible news of Israel's sin. Moses' heart was heavy, burdened with the knowledge that the people had broken the covenant before it was even fully sealed. Upon descending, Moses witnessed the scene of idolatry. the camp filled with shouting and dancing around the golden calf. Exodus 32 verse 19 describes his response. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands, and brake them beneath the mount. Moses shattered the tablets of the law, symbolizing the broken covenant. His grief and anger reflected the gravity of Israel's rebellion and the rupture it caused. This episode is a powerful lesson in faithfulness, patience, and holiness. It shows the danger of impatience, the allure of false security, and the devastating consequences of idolatry. Yet, it also sets the stage for God's mercy and the reaffirmation of his covenant in the chapters that follow. The descent of God upon Mount Sinai, the people's consecration, and the tragic golden calf episode together portray the complexity of humanity's relationship with the divine, marked by awe and fear, obedience and rebellion, judgment and mercy. As the thunderous voice of God echoed from the mountaintop, a profound and overwhelming fear swept through the assembly of Israel. This was no ordinary sound, but the very voice of the Almighty, resonating with divine authority and holiness. The people's reaction was immediate and visceral. Exodus 20 verses 18 to 21 recounts their terror. And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings, and the noise of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. The Israelites, though eager to receive God's law, recognized the immense gulf between divine purity and human frailty. The fear they experienced was a reverent dread, acknowledging that the Holy One's presence demanded utmost respect and obedience. Moses became the essential mediator, standing between God and the people, receiving the words of the covenant and conveying them to the assembly. This moment established the pattern of mediation and intercession that would characterize Israel's relationship with God. But beyond the 10 Commandments, God provided additional detailed laws, instructions that fleshed out the covenant, guiding Israel's social structure, justice system, and worship practices. These laws, found in Exodus chapters 21 through 24, form a comprehensive code that shaped Israel into a holy community reflecting God's justice and mercy. Laws of justice and social order. Beginning in Exodus 21, God gave Moses a series of regulations addressing civil, criminal, and social matters, detailing how justice was to be administered fairly among the people. For example, laws governing the treatment of servants emphasized dignity and fair treatment, forbidding oppression and ensuring periodic release. Exodus 21 verses 2 to 6 states, If thou buy an Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. This law affirmed that even those who entered servitude had rights and protections under God's justice system, foreshadowing principles of freedom and equality. Laws about personal injury and restitution further elaborated on consequences for harm. Exodus 21 verses 23 to 25 contains the principle of an eye for an eye. But if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Far from advocating cruelty, this principle sought to ensure proportional justice and to limit excessive punishment, setting a foundation for fairness and accountability. Instructions also addressed social responsibilities, such as protecting the vulnerable, widows, orphans, and foreigners, emphasizing God's care for the marginalized. Exodus 22 verses 21 to 24 commands, Thou shalt not vex a stranger, nor oppress him, for I am the Lord your God. This reminded Israel that justice was not merely human law but an extension of divine character. Laws of worship and covenant ritual. Beyond social and civil laws, God also detailed the rituals and observances necessary to maintain holiness and covenantal relationship. Exodus 23 verses 10 to 12 prescribes the Sabbath rest not only for people but for the land. 6 years thou shalt sow thy land, but the 7th year thou shalt let it rest. This law emphasized stewardship and reliance on God's provision, integrating social justice with divine worship. Feasts and festivals, such as the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Weeks, were established to commemorate God's saving acts and cultivate communal remembrance. Exodus 23 verses 14 to 17 commands, 3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year. All that openeth the womb is mine. These appointed times shaped Israel's liturgical calendar, reinforcing their identity as God's covenant people. The covenant confirmed. Exodus 24 describes the formal ratification of the covenant, a solemn ceremony binding God and Israel. Moses recited the law, and the people affirmed, all the words which the Lord hath said will we do. Exodus 24 verse 3. Moses then built an altar and sacrificed peace offerings, symbolizing reconciliation and fellowship with God. Exodus 24 verses 9 to 11 narrates a glorious vision. And Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. This extraordinary encounter affirmed God's presence with his people, a sacred moment sealing the covenant in blood and divine glory. This extensive code of laws, social regulations, and covenant ceremonies formed the bedrock of Israel's communal life, reflecting God's justice, holiness, mercy, and steadfast commitment. The people's initial fear of God's voice at Sinai was tempered by this revelation of God's law, a gracious gift guiding them toward holy living and covenant faithfulness. Through these laws, Israel learned that their relationship with God was not merely about salvation but about walking in his ways, embodying his character, and living in just community. Following the profound revelation of God's law and the covenant stipulations communicated to the people, the time came to solemnly ratify this divine agreement. A covenant not merely spoken but sealed in the ancient and sacred language of blood, a universal symbol of life, death, and binding commitment. Exodus 24 verses 3 to 8 offers a vivid account of this solemn ceremony. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord hath said will we do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold the blood of the covenant, which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words. This act was far more than a ritual. The people's unanimous response, all the words which the Lord hath said will we do, was a collective vow to obey, to embrace the law as their guiding covenant. Moses then took the blood from sacrifices, the lifeblood of animals offered to God, and sprinkled it upon the people, consecrating them to the covenant. This blood was a tangible manifestation of the spiritual bond between God and Israel. Blood, the essence of life, symbolized the cost and seriousness of the covenant. It was the life pledged to life, death to death, a sacred exchange binding God and man. In the ancient Near Eastern context, blood covenants were foundational to treaty-making. They signified an unbreakable agreement sealed with the life of the participants. God's use of blood here communicated that this covenant was irrevocable and holy. The covenant with Israel was no mere contract. It was a divine covenant, an eternal relationship forged in love, mercy, and justice. The sprinkling of blood purified the people, setting them apart as God's holy nation, dedicated to living under his righteous rule. This moment also foreshadowed the ultimate covenant, the new covenant established by the blood of Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, whose sacrifice would redeem humanity once and for all. Immediately following this covenant ratification, God called Moses once more into his holy presence for a more profound and intimate encounter. Exodus 24 verses 15 to 18 reveals, and Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. And the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the 7th day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses entered into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. The cloud that enveloped Mount Sinai was not a mere meteorological event, but the tangible manifestation of God's glory, his Shekinah presence, descending with overwhelming holiness. The mountain shrouded in thick, Impenetrable smoke signified both divine majesty and separation, a veil protecting finite humans from infinite purity. This divine cloud, like a consuming fire, struck awe and fear into the hearts of the Israelites. Fire symbolizes God's purifying presence, one that both sustains life and consumes impurity. Moses' ascent into this cloud was an act of unparalleled faith and obedience. Entering the very presence of God, Moses became a mediator between the divine and the human, a role unique and essential for the covenant community. The 40 days and nights Moses spent on the mountain were a period of intense communion, revelation, and transformation. During this time, God personally inscribed the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of stone with his own finger, signifying their eternal authority and divine origin. Exodus 31 verse 18 states, "And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God." This divine writing marked the law as perfect, immutable, and holy, a covenantal foundation for Israel's life and worship. Moses' prolonged stay indicated the seriousness and sacredness of the covenant. The cloud remained over the mountain, a visible reminder to the people below of God's presence and the holiness of the moment. The people's experience, trembling and reverent, echoed the vast chasm between human sinfulness and divine holiness. They longed for God's guidance but feared his immediate presence, preferring mediation through Moses. This entire episode reveals profound theological truths. God's covenant with his people is initiated by his grace and holiness, sealed by life-giving blood, and sustained by ongoing divine presence and law. It highlights the necessity of obedience, reverence, and trust in God's promises. The cloud, fire, blood, and law intertwine as symbols of God's justice and mercy. A holy God who demands purity yet graciously provides for relationship. Israel's identity was forever shaped in this crucible of covenant, with Moses as the appointed mediator, carrying their hopes and God's commands. As the people of Israel stood on the cusp of entering the promised land, God gave Moses detailed and sacred instructions for building a dwelling place, a tabernacle, where he would meet with his people and dwell among them. This was no ordinary tent or structure, but a carefully designed sanctuary imbued with profound spiritual meaning and divine holiness. The tabernacle was the earthly symbol of God's presence, a mobile sanctuary that traveled with Israel throughout the wilderness. It was a tangible sign that God was not distant or aloof but desired intimate fellowship with his people. This was a revelation of covenant relationship, a God who dwells among his creation, guiding, protecting, and sanctifying them. The Ark of the Covenant. Central to the tabernacle's design was the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object, representing God's throne on earth. God commanded the construction of this ark with exacting specifications. Exodus 25 verses 10 to 22 describes its dimensions and features. "They shall make an ark of shittim wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold. And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee." The ark was a wooden chest overlaid with pure gold inside and out, symbolizing the preciousness and sanctity of God's covenant. It contained the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, the testimony, a perpetual reminder of the covenant law. On the top of the ark was the mercy seat, made of pure gold, with 2 cherubim of gold stretching out their wings and facing each other, covering the mercy seat. Exodus 25 verses 17 to 22 reveals, "And thou shalt make 2 cherubims of gold, and the cherubims shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings. There I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat." The mercy seat was the symbolic throne of God's presence, the place of divine forgiveness and communication. Between the cherubim, God's glory manifested, a tangible sign of his nearness. The ark was carried by poles inserted through rings on its sides, emphasizing that God's presence moves with his people. Spiritually, the ark represented God's holiness, justice, mercy, and covenant faithfulness. It was the heart of the tabernacle, the visible evidence that God dwelt among his people. The table of showbread. Within the tabernacle's holy place stood the table of showbread, another sacred object laden with symbolism. Exodus 25 verses 23 to 30 commands, "Thou shalt make a table of shittim wood, and overlay it with pure gold, and thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me always." On this table were placed 12 loaves of bread, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. The bread was arranged in 2 rows and was changed weekly, symbolizing continual fellowship and sustenance. The showbread was a sign of God's provision and presence with his people. It reminded Israel that God was their spiritual sustainer, the bread of life, who nourished their souls daily. The table's pure gold overlay signified the sacredness of fellowship with God. It was not merely food but a holy offering, a covenantal symbol of communion and dependence. The lampstand, menorah. Opposite the table stood the golden lampstand, known as the menorah, intricately designed with 7 branches adorned with almond blossoms and flowers. Exodus 25 verses 31 to 40 provides detailed instructions. "Thou shalt make a candlestick of pure gold, with its 7 lamps. The candlestick shall be made of a talent of pure gold. The candlestick shall be beaten work." This lampstand provided light within the holy place, symbolizing God's illumination, guidance, and eternal presence. The 7 lamps represent completeness and perfection, God's perfect light dispelling darkness. The menorah also prefigured Christ, the light of the world, illuminating the path for his people. The craftsmanship of the lampstand, beaten and shaped with care, reflects the beauty and glory of divine revelation. The altar of incense. Before the veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place stood the altar of incense, a smaller golden altar on which fragrant incense was burned. Exodus 30 verses 1 to 10 instructs, "Thou shalt make an altar to burn incense upon. Aaron shall burn thereon sweet incense every morning, and when Aaron lighteth the lamps at even, he shall burn incense upon it." The altar symbolized prayer, worship, and intercession. The sweet aroma of the incense represented the prayers of God's people ascending to heaven. This perpetual offering taught Israel the importance of continual communion with God, a spiritual fragrance pleasing to the Lord. The altar of incense foreshadowed Christ's role as the eternal high priest, interceding on behalf of humanity. The priestly garments. God also gave precise instructions for the garments worn by Aaron and his sons, the priests who ministered in the tabernacle. Exodus 28 and 39 detail the elaborate design. "And thou shalt make holy garments for Aaron thy brother for glory and for beauty, and thou shalt make the ephod of gold, of blue, and of purple, and of scarlet, and the breastplate of judgment." The high priest's garments were rich in symbolism: gold for divinity, blue for heaven, purple for royalty, and scarlet for sacrifice. The breastplate contained 12 precious stones, each representing a tribe of Israel, symbolizing that the priest carried the entire people before God. The turban bore the golden plate engraved with "Holiness to the Lord," declaring that the priests represented the holy God and served as mediators. These garments reminded Israel that approaching a holy God required sanctification, reverence, and appointed mediators. The tabernacle and its furnishings embodied the intimate relationship God desired with his people, dwelling among them in holiness, guiding them through obedience, and providing means for worship and atonement. Each element, the ark, table, lampstand, altar, and garments, was a tangible revelation of divine truths, teaching Israel about God's nature, their identity, and the pathway of communion. The instructions were exacting, underscoring the importance of obedience and reverence in approaching God. The glory of the Lord would one day fill this tabernacle, signaling God's presence with his people, a beacon of hope and holiness in the wilderness journey. While Moses remained on Mount Sinai, enveloped in the divine cloud and communing with God for 40 days and nights, the people of Israel below faced a moment of profound crisis, one that would mark one of the darkest chapters in their wilderness journey: the incident of the golden calf. The people's anxiety and impatience grew with each passing day. Moses' prolonged absence led to confusion, fear, and a restless longing for tangible assurance. Though they had witnessed miracles and heard the thunder of God's voice, their human frailty sought a visible God, an object upon which to fix their faith. Exodus 32 verse 1 reveals the beginning of this tragic lapse. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. This request was a direct violation of the first and second commandments, calling for gods besides Yahweh and demanding a graven image. It reflected a desperate attempt to replace the unseen God with an idol they could see and control. Aaron, Moses' brother and second in command, found himself pressured by the massed voices of a restless multitude. In a moment of weakness, he acquiesced. He instructed the people to bring their gold earrings, ornaments that gleamed with the light of Egypt's wealth. Exodus 32 verses 3 to 4. And all the people took off the earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. The golden calf was fashioned quickly, an idol representing a false god. It symbolized a tragic lapse into idolatry, a betrayal of the covenant God had just declared at Sinai. The people proclaimed, celebrated, and offered sacrifices to this golden image, indulging in revelry and forgetting the holiness to which they were called. Exodus 32 verse 6 describes the scene. And they rose up to play, and went their ways. This episode was a profound breach of faith, a rupture in the covenant relationship. The people traded the living God for a lifeless idol, reflecting their deep-seated fear and impatience. Meanwhile, Moses remained on the mountain, enveloped in God's presence. The Lord revealed to him the covenant laws, commandments and statutes meant to guide Israel in holiness and righteousness. Exodus 24 verse 12 reveals, And the Lord said unto Moses, Come up to me into the mount, and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone, and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. The people declared, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Exodus 32 verse 4. This was a profound spiritual betrayal, a rejection of the covenant God who had revealed himself at Sinai. The camp erupted into revelry. Exodus 32 verse 6 describes, And they rose up to play, and went their ways. This phrase euphemistically describes wild, licentious celebration, marked by dancing and idolatrous worship, a stark contrast to the solemn covenant established moments before. Moses, still on the mountain, was unaware of the magnitude of this rebellion until God spoke. Exodus 32 verses 7 to 8 recounts God's anger. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go, get thee down. For thy people, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. God's words express divine grief and judgment. The people had not only broken his commandments but had reverted to pagan practices, threatening to undo the covenant. Moses interceded fervently for the people, pleading for God's mercy. Exodus 32 verses 11 to 14. Wherefore should the Egyptians speak, and say, For mischief did he bring them out, to slay them in the mountains. And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people. This dialogue reveals the profound intercession of Moses, his deep identification with Israel, and the merciful character of God, who relents from destruction in response to prayer. Descending the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in hand, Moses witnessed the horror of idolatry firsthand. Exodus 32 verse 19. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands, and brake them beneath the mount. The shattering of the tablets symbolized the broken covenant and the rupture in relationship caused by Israel's sin. Moses confronted Aaron and the people, calling them to repentance and justice. He destroyed the golden calf, grinding it to powder and scattering it on the water. Exodus 32 verse 20. Moses then called for those loyal to the Lord to purify the camp. The Levites rose and executed judgment against the idolaters, a grim but necessary act to restore holiness. Exodus 32 verses 26 to 28 recounts, "And Moses stood in the gate of the camp, and said, Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men." This harsh judgment demonstrated the cost of sin and the need for communal holiness. Moses again interceded for the people, even offering his own life in place of theirs. Exodus 32 verses 31 to 32 reveals his deep sorrow. "Yet now, if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written." God responded with justice tempered by mercy, and the covenant was renewed in subsequent chapters. The golden calf incident remains a solemn warning about impatience, idolatry, and the consequences of turning from God's holiness. It highlights human weakness but also God's enduring grace and the mediating role of Moses. After the catastrophic rebellion of the golden calf, the relationship between Israel and their holy God was strained to the breaking point. The people had violated the covenant in the most grievous way, idolatry, and the consequences were severe. Yet, standing between the wrath of God and the fate of the people was Moses, the mediator, whose heart burned with intercession and compassion. We first glimpse Moses' powerful intercession in Exodus 32 verses 11 to 13, where God declares his anger and intention to destroy the people. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Go, get thee down. For thy people, which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them." Here, God's words reveal his deep sorrow and righteous anger. The phrase, "my wrath may wax hot," expresses divine fury against sin. God considers consuming the people, reflecting the severity of their breach. But Moses responds with fervent appeal. "And Moses besought the Lord his God, and said, Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, which thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power?" Moses' plea appeals to God's character, the covenant love and mighty acts that brought Israel out of slavery. He reminds God of his reputation among the Egyptians, who might say God's deliverance was false if he destroyed his people. Exodus 32 verse 13 states, "Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thine own self." Moses appeals to God's faithfulness to the patriarchs. The covenant with Abraham and his descendants is foundational. God's promises to them bind his actions. This invocation grounds Moses' intercession in divine faithfulness rather than human merit. In Exodus 32 verse 14, the response is profound. "And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people." The Hebrew term here means God relented or changed his mind, reflecting his mercy. Despite justice demanding judgment, God's mercy prevails in response to Moses' intercession. Moses' intercession did not end with words. It was accompanied by decisive action. When descending the mountain, Moses witnessed the people's idolatry and his anger burned fiercely. Exodus 32 verse 19 says, "And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands, and brake them beneath the mount." The breaking of the stone tablets symbolizes the shattering of the covenant by Israel's sin. The anger waxed hot reveals Moses' righteous indignation, reflecting the gravity of their betrayal. Moses confronted Aaron and the people, demanding repentance. He destroyed the golden calf, grinding it to powder and casting it into the water, making it impossible to restore. Exodus 32 verse 20 states, "And he took the calf which they had made, and burnt it with fire, and ground it to powder, and strawed it upon the water." This act symbolized the utter destruction of idolatry, an uncompromising call to holiness. Moses then turned to purify the camp. In Exodus 32, 26 to 28, he gathered the Levites and challenged, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me." The Levites' faithful response demonstrated their commitment to God's holiness. They executed judgment on those who persisted in sin, about 3,000 men falling that day. This sobering punishment underlined the cost of rebellion and the necessity of communal purity in covenant life. Yet Moses' intercession continued beyond judgment. In Exodus 32 verses 31 to 32, Moses implores, "But now, if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written." This unprecedented offer, to sacrifice his own covenantal standing for the people, reveals Moses' selfless love and identification with Israel. He recognizes that the covenant is binding not only for the people but for himself. This intercession highlights the heart of true mediation, standing in the gap, pleading for mercy, and willing to bear the cost for others. The narrative extends to Exodus 33, where Moses petitions God further. In Exodus 33 verses 12 to 17, Moses pleads, "If thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not in that thou goest with us?" Moses understands that without God's presence, their journey is futile. God responds with a promise of his presence and rest, affirming the covenant relationship despite past failings. This entire episode richly illustrates the interplay between divine justice and mercy, the seriousness of covenant obedience, and the power of intercessory prayer. Moses stands as a type of Christ, mediator, intercessor, and savior, who pleads with the Father on behalf of sinful humanity. God's mercy triumphs not by ignoring sin but through grace extended in response to heartfelt intercession. The covenant remains intact, renewed by God's patience and Moses' steadfast advocacy. Amidst the intense journey of covenant, sin, and intercession, Moses sought an even deeper encounter with the Almighty. After the calamity of the golden calf and the renewal of the covenant, Moses longed for a fuller revelation of God's presence and character. This yearning culminated in one of the most profound moments recorded in Scripture, God's glory passing before Moses. In Exodus 33 verse 18, Moses boldly asks the Lord, "Show me now thy glory." This request was unparalleled. Moses desired an intimate vision of the divine majesty, a glimpse beyond the veiled presence God had thus far allowed. It reveals a deep yearning for closeness, to truly know the God who called him. God's response was both gracious and reverent. He agreed to reveal his goodness but warned that no man could see his face and live. Exodus 33 verses 19 to 20. "I will make all my goodness pass before thee, but," he said, "thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live." The divine self-revelation was both a gift and a limit, for the infinite holiness of God is overwhelming to finite humanity. Instead, God prepared a way for Moses to witness his glory in a veiled manner. Exodus 33 verses 21 to 23 continues, "Behold, there is a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon a rock. And it shall come to pass, while my glory passeth by, that I will put thee in a cleft of the rock, and will cover thee with my hand until I have passed by. And I will take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen." This remarkable passage reveals God's compassion and protection. Moses is placed in a secure cleft, shielded by God's hand, allowing a partial, safe revelation. He will see God's back parts, an expression conveying a view of God's glory in a way humanity can bear, a profound mystery that evokes awe and wonder. The rock represents stability and refuge, symbolizing the security God provides to those who approach him in faith. Following this intimate encounter, God descended upon Mount Sinai anew, unveiling his character to Moses in a majestic display. Exodus 34 verses 5 to 7 declares, "And the Lord descended in the cloud, and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him, and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin." This proclamation is the divine self-revelation of God's essential attributes, a panoramic declaration of his mercy, grace, patience, and justice. The Lord is merciful and gracious, showing tender compassion beyond human expectation. His long-suffering patience endures through generations, offering repeated chances for repentance. God is abundant in goodness and truth, faithful to his promises and just in his governance. He keeps mercy for thousands, extending forgiveness generously, even amid sin and rebellion. Yet, he also will by no means clear the guilty, affirming his holiness and righteousness that demand justice. This encounter profoundly shaped Moses' understanding of God and Israel's covenant relationship. God's glory passing by was not only an awe-inspiring vision but a revelation of divine nature. A God who is simultaneously holy and merciful, just and loving. The vision provided Moses with assurance that God's presence would continue with Israel, guiding and forgiving them despite their failings. It was a defining moment of spiritual intimacy and theological revelation. A glimpse into the mystery of God's character that would resonate through the history of Israel and the entire biblical narrative. After the devastating rebellion of the golden calf, the covenant between God and his people Israel lay broken, fractured by sin and rebellion. Yet God, in his infinite mercy and steadfast love, moved to renew and restore this sacred relationship, demonstrating that divine forgiveness and grace are possible even when humanity falls short. This renewal unfolds profoundly in Exodus chapters 34 through 40, beginning with God commanding Moses to hew 2 new tablets of stone, fresh tablets on which God himself would inscribe the words of the covenant. Exodus 34 verse 1 declares, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables, which thou breakest." This directive reveals God's unwavering commitment. Despite Israel's failure, God would not abandon his people, but would restore the covenant, renewing his promises and laws with fresh clarity. Moses ascended Mount Sinai once more, carrying the responsibility of this renewal, a solemn mission to receive the divine laws anew. The process of renewal begins with the radiant presence of God descending in glory, as recorded in Exodus 34 verses 5 to 7, which reveals God's merciful and gracious nature, full of compassion and truth. God then recapitulates the covenant terms with Moses, emphasizing holiness, obedience, and exclusivity. Exodus 34 verses 10 to 28 contains the covenant's renewed stipulations. God promises to make Israel my treasured possession among all people, v.10, a special, holy nation. The people must observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, dedicating themselves to purity and remembrance of deliverance, v.18. They are instructed to keep the Sabbath holy, a continual sign of the covenant, v.21. Prohibitions against intermarriage with the inhabitants of the land and idolatry reaffirm Israel's call to be distinct, verses 12-16. The command to redeem every firstborn, both man and beast, signifies consecration to God, v.19. Prohibitions against cooking a young goat in its mother's milk anticipate God's care for ethical and holy living, v.26. These laws reiterate the themes of holiness, obedience, and separation from pagan practices, framing Israel's life as a witness to the one true God. Moses' face after this encounter bore a radiant glow, an outward sign of intimate communion with God. Exodus 34 verses 29 to 35 recounts, "And it came to pass, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him." This radiance signified the transformational power of God's presence. Though the people were initially afraid of his shining face, Moses veiled it, symbolizing the gap between divine glory and human frailty, and pointing toward the future revelation of God's glory fully in Christ. Following this renewal, the covenant was to be enacted through the construction of the Tabernacle and the institution of worship and priestly service, which would provide the means for Israel to maintain communion with their holy God. Exodus 40 verses 34 to 38 describes the culmination. "Then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire was on it by night. God's presence filled the renewed covenant community, signifying acceptance and ongoing fellowship. The visible cloud and fire guided Israel's journey, a continual reminder that God dwelt among them. The renewed covenant was thus not simply a reissuing of laws but a dynamic restoration. A divine act of grace re-establishing relationship, demanding obedience, and promising presence. It embodied the profound truth that God's covenantal love endures beyond human failure, offering forgiveness, transformation, and hope. Israel was called once again to be a holy nation, a kingdom of priests, living by God's statutes and manifesting His glory in the earth. After years of wandering and revelation, the people of Israel reached a monumental point in their journey: the completion of the Tabernacle, the divinely ordained sanctuary where God would dwell among His people. This was not merely a construction project. It was the physical manifestation of a sacred covenant relationship, designed according to precise heavenly instructions given to Moses on Mount Sinai. The detailed records in Exodus 39 describe the faithful and meticulous work of Bezalel, Oholiab, and all the artisans who fashioned the intricate components of the tabernacle. Each piece crafted with skill, devotion, and according to God's exact specifications. Exodus 39 verse 32 recounts, "Thus was all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation finished. And the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so did they." The word "finished" here signifies not just completion but perfection in obedience. The people followed every divine command exactly, demonstrating reverence and unity in purpose. The tabernacle components. The fabric of the tabernacle included finely woven curtains, the covering of ram skins dyed red, and the outermost covering of badger skins, layers of protection symbolizing the divine presence veiled yet accessible. The sacred furniture, the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the golden lampstand, and the altar of incense were all in place, symbolizing God's covenant, provision, light, and intercession. The priestly garments, woven with gold, blue, purple, and scarlet threads, were made ready, symbolizing the holy mediation between God and man. The setting up of the tabernacle. In Exodus 40, Moses receives God's command to set up the tabernacle on the first day of the first month of the second year after the Exodus. Exodus 40 verses 1 to 2 records, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, On the first day of the first month shalt thou set up the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation." The precision of this timing highlights the significance of the tabernacle's erection as the initiation of Israel's permanent fellowship with God. Moses obeyed exactly, assembling the tent, hanging the curtains, setting up the boards and bars, placing the veil, and positioning the holy furnishings inside. Exodus 40 verses 16 to 33 narrates the detailed work. "And Moses did according to all that the Lord commanded him, so did he. And it came to pass in the first month in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up." The language emphasizes faithful obedience and completion. Each element was placed exactly as God had commanded, forming a sacred space where heaven touched earth. The glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle. Once the tabernacle was set up, an extraordinary event marked God's approval and presence. Exodus 40 verses 34 to 35 proclaims, "Then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter into the tent of the congregation, because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." The cloud symbolized the Shekinah glory, the divine presence dwelling visibly among His people. It was a brilliant, consuming manifestation of God's holiness and favor. Moses' inability to enter the tabernacle signified the overpowering holiness of God's presence. The cloud and glory marked the tabernacle as holy ground, set apart for worship, communion, and divine encounter. God's guidance through the cloud. The cloud did not merely signify God's presence, but also His guidance. Exodus 40 verses 36 to 38 describes, "And when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud were not taken up, Then they journeyed not till the day that it was taken up. The Israelites followed the cloud's movement as a divine signal to journey or camp. By day, the cloud hovered. By night, it appeared as fire, providing direction and assurance. This dynamic presence emphasized God's intimate involvement in their pilgrimage, leading them not only physically but spiritually toward the promised land. Spiritual significance. The completion of the tabernacle and the indwelling glory marked the fulfillment of God's promise to dwell among his people. This sanctuary was a prototype, a divine shadow of the true heavenly temple. It represented God's holy presence made accessible through obedience, worship, and the mediation of priests. The glory filling the tabernacle reassured Israel that despite their wilderness hardships and past failures, God remained with them, guiding, protecting, and sanctifying them as his treasured possession. This sacred moment set the tone for Israel's entire wilderness journey, a continual experience of God's presence and glory, calling his people into holiness, obedience, and covenant faithfulness. As the journey of the children of Israel draws to a profound pause, we find ourselves reflecting on the wondrous faithfulness of the Lord God, faithfulness that spans from the oppression of Egypt to the awe-filled encounter at Mount Sinai. From the earliest days of deliverance, when God raised up Moses as a deliverer, through the miracles that shattered Egypt's hold, and on to the divine covenant revealed in thunder and fire, the thread of God's steadfast love is unmistakable. God's faithfulness in deliverance. Recall the promise spoken through Moses, "I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." Exodus 20 verse 2. This declaration is a cornerstone reminding Israel and us that their God is the Redeemer. He saw their affliction, heard their cries, and acted with mighty power to set them free. Every plague, every parting of the sea, every provision in the wilderness was not random or distant, but a personal demonstration of God's covenant love. A love that refuses to abandon those he calls his own. Provision and sustenance. In the wilderness, where the desert's harshness could have swallowed the people, God's hand provided manna, quail, and water from the rock. These daily miracles taught Israel dependence, not on their own strength or resources, but on God's ongoing grace. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. Psalm 78 verse 25. Each morsel of manna was a lesson in trust, a sacred gift reminding the people that God sustains not only their bodies but their spirits. Guidance and presence. Through the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, God's presence was a constant guide and protector. This visible manifestation of God's glory reassured Israel in every step, every camp, every uncertain moment. Exodus 13 verse 21 declares, "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud, to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light." This divine accompaniment symbolizes the personal nature of God's covenant, a God who leads, illuminates, and never forsakes. Holiness and covenant. At Sinai, the covenant was revealed amidst fire, thunder, and smoke. The Ten Commandments became the moral and spiritual foundation for Israel's identity as God's holy nation. "Ye shall be holy, for I the Lord your God am holy." Leviticus 19 verse 2. God's faithfulness includes calling his people to holiness, to reflect his character in a world shadowed by sin. Despite Israel's failings, the golden calf and murmuring, God's mercy prevailed. Moses' intercession and God's willingness to renew the covenant underscore a God of compassion, justice, and grace. Reflection on journey. As we look back on this great narrative, from bondage through deliverance to covenant, we see a God who is eternally faithful, powerful beyond measure, yet tender and near. God's faithfulness is not conditional on human perfection but anchored in his unchanging nature. He calls, leads, disciplines, and restores. This journey invites us to rest in that faithfulness, to trust that no matter our wilderness seasons, God's presence accompanies us. His promises endure, his provision sustains, and his covenant holds fast. A benediction for rest. May this truth settle deep within. The God who brought Israel from slavery to freedom is the same God who walks with you. His glory shines in darkness. His mercy flows through trials. Rest now in His presence, knowing that His faithfulness is your sure foundation. His covenant love envelopes you, calling you into holiness, peace, and hope. As you drift into sleep, let the assurance of God's steadfast love calm every fear and quiet every restless thought. From Egypt to Sinai, through every step, He is with you, faithful forever. As we come to the close of this sacred journey through the book of Exodus, it is fitting to pause and reflect with gentle encouragement, a soft whisper to the soul, that no matter the season of life we find ourselves in, God's steadfast presence and faithfulness remain unchanging. Life's seasons bring both abundance and scarcity, joy and trial, light and shadow. The wilderness is not only a geographical place but a spiritual metaphor, a time of testing, waiting, growth, and transformation. In every season, whether one of deliverance or difficulty, promise or patience, God invites us to trust Him, to rest not in our own understanding or strength, but in the unshakable character of the Lord who brought Israel out of Egypt and led them to Sinai's sacred encounter. The journey of Israel reveals this divine truth again and again. God is faithful when we falter, present when we feel alone, merciful when we repent, and powerful to provide, protect, and guide. Therefore, whatever wilderness you face today, be it uncertainty, loss, fear, or waiting, hear this gentle call. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will direct your paths. He who called the ancient Israelites out of bondage into covenant and glory is the same God who walks with you now. Let us now rest in the tender and majestic words of God Himself, as revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai, words that echo through time, declaring the very heart of God. His mercy, grace, patience, and steadfast love. I will softly read from Exodus 34 verses 6 to 7, a divine proclamation that invites us to trust, to find hope, and to rest in the character of our God. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty. Pause here to reflect on the depth of these attributes. God is merciful. His compassion flows toward us even when we stumble, offering healing and restoration. He is gracious, giving us unearned favor, meeting us in our need with kindness. Long-suffering speaks of His patience. He waits, giving time for repentance and change, slow to anger. His goodness and truth abound. He is faithful and trustworthy, unwavering in His promises. He keeps mercy for thousands. His forgiveness extends beyond measure, covering generations. Though He forgives, He also maintains justice. He will not clear the guilty. As these words softly wash over your spirit, may they bring peace, assurance, and rest. The God who spoke from Sinai is the same God who speaks into your life now, a God who is holy yet loving, just yet merciful. Trust Him in all seasons. Let His mercy be your refuge, His truth your guide, and His steadfast love your comfort. May this gentle meditation cradle your soul as you enter into rest. May the faithfulness of God, the same yesterday, today, and forever, be your firm foundation. As you now prepare to enter the sacred space of rest, I invite you to join me in this prayer, an earnest and gentle lifting of heart and mind to the Almighty God, who watches over us with unwavering love and tender care. Let every breath you take be a quiet offering, every thought softened by the assurance of His presence. Let us pray. O Lord our God, Creator of heaven and earth, the one who spoke light into darkness and called the stars by name, we come before you now, humbled and grateful. You who have been our refuge and strength, our ever-present help in trouble. We thank you for the journey we have shared through your holy word. You have revealed yourself in mighty acts, bringing your people from slavery into freedom, leading them through deserts, feeding them with manna, and dwelling among them in glory. You have shown yourself as merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abundant in steadfast love. Tonight, as we prepare to lay down our bodies in rest, we ask you to cover us with your peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding. Quiet the rushing thoughts, still the worries that stir within. Let your presence be a gentle cloud that enfolds us, sheltering us from every fear and unrest. May your holy angels encamp around us, guarding us through the hours of darkness. May your light shine in our hearts, dispelling shadows and filling us with hope. Lord, we pray for your Spirit to breathe renewal and healing upon every weary soul here. Where there is sorrow, may your comfort flow. Where there is pain, may your healing balm soothe. Where there is doubt, may your truth bring clarity and strength. As we close our eyes, let us see not only the past struggles but the unchanging faithfulness that carried Israel from Egypt to Sinai, a faithfulness that remains with us today. You are the same God yesterday, today, and forever. Guide our dreams, O God, that they may be sweet and restorative. Protect our minds from anxious thoughts and our bodies from distress. Let sleep be a holy gift, a sacred pause where your restorative power works deep within. Renew our spirits in this quiet hour. Prepare us for the coming day, strengthened to walk in your ways, faithful to your covenant, and radiant with your glory. Bless the works of our hands and the intentions of our hearts. May our lives reflect your holiness, our words echo your truth, and our deeds embody your love. Teach us to trust you in all seasons, to lean on you when the path is uncertain, to rejoice in your provision when blessings abound, and to rest in your presence always. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we surrender this night to you. Guard us, guide us, and keep us safe. Let your peace reign in every corner of our lives, and your presence be our constant companion. Thank you for your unfailing love. Thank you for calling us your children. May your glory be our song and our strength. Now, as the world grows quiet and our spirits draw near to rest, receive our hearts in worship and gratitude. May the gentle embrace of your grace carry us through the night until morning light. In your holy and precious name we pray.